The cleaner begged her boss not to sign a deal. What he did next shocked everyone. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Mary Parker had cleaned 1,000 boardrooms, but she had never seen one where a man's entire future hung in the balance like a sword over his head. James Vance sat at the head of the gleaming conference table, his silver pen poised over documents that would either save his company or destroy everything he had built. The man across from him smiled with the kind of charm that made people forget to ask the right questions. Mary knew that smile. She had fallen for it once, and it had cost her everything. Now, watching through the glass doors as the final signatures approached, she realized she was about to watch it happen again, to the one man who had never looked at her like she was invisible, even when she was supposed to be. "Mr. Vance, you are working too late again." James looked up from his computer screen, his tired eyes focusing on the woman who had just entered his office with her cleaning cart. Mary Parker. He had asked her name months ago, though he suspected she had not expected him to remember it. Most executives would not have bothered to learn the name of their night janitor, but James had always believed that respect was earned by giving it first. "Mary, I could say the same about you," he replied, leaning back in his leather chair. "It is past midnight." She smiled, that gentle expression that had become as familiar to him as his morning coffee. "The building does not clean itself, sir. Besides, I like the quiet hours, less chaos, more peace." James watched her work with the same quiet efficiency she brought every night. She never rushed, never cut corners, never treated her job as beneath her dignity. In a world where everyone seemed to want something from him, Mary Parker simply did her work and wished him a good evening. It was refreshing in a way he had not expected when he first inherited his father's company 3 years ago. "How long have you been working here, Mary?" he asked, genuinely curious. 4 years now," she said, carefully dusting his bookshelf. "Started right after the divorce was finalized. Needed something steady, something that would not interfere with my son's schedule." James felt a small tightness in his chest. He had not known she was divorced, had not known she had a son. "How old is your boy?" 12, David. "He stays with his father every other weekend, which is why I work the night shift. During the week, I am home when he gets back from school." The way she said it, matter of fact and without self-pity, told James everything he needed to know about Mary Parker's priorities. Family first, always. It was a principle he had learned from his own father, though he had never had the chance to put it into practice himself. "You are a good mother," he said quietly. Mary paused in her dusting, turning to look at him with surprise. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. That means more than you know." They fell into comfortable silence, James returning to his quarterly reports while Mary continued her work. This had become their routine over the past several months. Brief conversations in the empty office building, two people who had somehow found a moment of genuine human connection in the midst of their separate struggles. "May I ask you something?" Mary said as she prepared to leave. "Of course. Do you ever get tired of being the man everyone expects you to be?" The question hit James like a physical blow. He stared at her, this woman who cleaned his office, and somehow saw straight through to the exhaustion he carried like a weight on his shoulders. How had she known that was exactly what he was thinking about as he sat alone in his office night after night? "Every single day," he admitted. Mary nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "My ex-husband used to say that the hardest part about being successful was that everyone assumed success meant you had everything figured out. He was wrong about most things, but he was right about that." James found himself leaning forward, drawn by the unexpected wisdom in her words. What else was he wrong about? "That integrity was optional," Mary said simply. that you could build something lasting on a foundation of lies. That the people who loved you would not notice when you stopped being the person they fell in love with. She gathered her cleaning supplies with practiced efficiency. But James sensed there was more to the story. There always was, with divorce. He had watched enough friends go through it to know that the simple explanations were never the whole truth. "Mary," he said as she reached the door, "thank you for the conversation. I mean, it is nice to talk to someone who does not want anything from me." She turned back, her expression serious. "Everyone wants something, Mr. Vance. The difference is whether they are willing to be honest about it. Good night." James sat alone in his office long after she left, thinking about her words and wondering what Mary Parker might want that she was not willing to ask for. Outside his window, the city sparkled with lights from 1,000 other buildings where people were working late, going home to families, making decisions that would shape their futures. For the first time in months, he felt less alone in his glass tower. The next morning would bring new challenges, new demands on his time and attention. But tonight, he had been reminded that sometimes the most important conversations happened in the quiet hours, with people who saw you as a person rather than a position. He made a mental note to ask Mary more about her son the next time he saw her. In his experience, the best way to know someone was to understand what they loved most. Marcus Thorne had the kind of smile that made people forget to read the fine print. James noticed it immediately when his potential business partner walked into the conference room for their preliminary meeting, flanked by 2 assistants who looked like they had been hired for their ability to nod at the right moments. "James!" Marcus extended his hand with the enthusiasm of a man who had never met a deal he could not charm his way into. "I have been looking forward to this meeting for weeks. What we are going to build together is going to revolutionize the entire industry." James shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and the way Marcus held eye contact just a beat longer than necessary. Classic power play, but executed with enough charm to make it seem natural. In his 3 years of running Vance Corporation, James had learned to recognize the type. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, Marcus," James replied, gesturing for his guest to take a seat. But I think we should start with specifics rather than revolutionary promises. My board is very interested in concrete projections." Marcus laughed, a sound that filled the room with practiced warmth. "Spoken like a true businessman. I like that about you, James. You do not get distracted by the flash and dazzle. You want substance." "Substance tends to be more profitable in the long run," James said dryly. "Absolutely. And that is exactly what I am offering." Marcus opened his leather portfolio with a flourish. "I have brought detailed financial projections for our partnership, market analysis, projected growth rates, timeline for implementation, everything your board could want." James accepted the documents, noting their professional presentation. Everything looked impressive at first glance: glossy charts, confident numbers, testimonials from satisfied clients. But something about the way Marcus watched him read made James uncomfortable. There was an expectation in those eyes, a certainty that the charm had already done its work. "These numbers are aggressive," James observed, setting the papers down. 30% growth in the first year alone. "Conservative, actually," Marcus replied without missing a beat. "I have achieved 50% growth with my previous partners. But I wanted to underpromise and overdeliver for our first project together." James found himself thinking about Mary's words from the night before. That integrity was not optional, that you could not build something lasting on a foundation of lies. Looking at Marcus across the conference table, he wondered which category this partnership would fall into. "Tell me about your previous partners," James said. "The ones who achieved that 50% growth." For just a moment, Marcus's smile faltered. It was so brief that James almost missed it, But there it was, a flicker of something that looked like discomfort. Then the charm was back, full force. Brilliant people, all of them, Marcus said smoothly. Unfortunately, some of them were not prepared for the level of success we achieved together. Growth can be overwhelming if you are not ready for it. James felt his internal warning system activate. In his experience, when people talked about their previous partners with vague language and subtle blame, it usually meant the story was more complicated than they wanted to admit. "I would like to speak with some of them," James said. "Get their perspective on what worked and what could have been improved." Marcus's assistants exchanged a glance that they probably thought was subtle. Marcus himself maintained his confident demeanor, but James caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "I wish that were possible," Marcus said with what sounded like genuine regret. "Unfortunately, most of my previous partnerships ended with confidentiality agreements. Legal complications, you understand? Nothing personal, just business protecting business." James nodded, filing that information away. He had signed his share of confidentiality agreements over the years, but he had never had to use them to prevent former partners from talking about their experiences. Usually, successful partnerships created references who were happy to recommend future collaborations. "I understand," James said, "but I am sure you can appreciate that I need to do my due diligence. Perhaps you could provide contact information for some of your other professional references, clients, vendors, anyone who can speak to your business practices." Marcus's smile never wavered, but James saw him shift slightly in his chair. "Of course, I will have my assistant compile a list for you, though I have to say, James, I am a little surprised by the level of skepticism. I thought our mutual friend had already vouched for my character." James frowned. "Mutual friend? David Richardson. He spoke very highly of you when he recommended that I reach out, said you were exactly the kind of ethical businessman I should be working with." Richardson, James knew the name, a networking contact from his business school days. They had done a small deal together 2 years ago, nothing major, but it had gone smoothly. If Richardson had recommended Marcus, that carried some weight. "I will give David a call," James said. "But I hope you understand that positive references are not the same as blind trust. I owe it to my employees and shareholders to be thorough." "Absolutely," Marcus agreed. "I would be disappointed if you were anything less than thorough. Integrity is everything in this business." James almost smiled at that. Integrity. The word seemed to follow him everywhere lately, a reminder that the decisions he made affected more than just his own bottom line. He thought about Mary again, about her quiet dignity and her belief that you could not build something lasting on lies. He wondered what she would think of Marcus Thorne and his impressive presentation. "I will review these materials and get back to you within the week," James said, standing to signal the end of the meeting. "If everything checks out, we can schedule a formal presentation for my board." Marcus rose as well, his confidence seemingly unshaken by James's cautious approach. "I look forward to it. And James, I think you're going to be very pleasantly surprised by what we can accomplish together." After Marcus and his assistants left, James sat alone in the conference room, staring at the financial projections spread across the table. Everything looked perfect on paper. Maybe too perfect. In his experience, deals that seemed too good to be true usually were. He picked up his phone to call David Richardson, then hesitated. Something Mary had said was nagging at him, that her ex-husband had been wrong about integrity being optional, that he had thought he could build something lasting on a foundation of lies, that the people who loved him had noticed when he stopped being the person they fell in love with. James did not know why he was thinking about Mary's ex-husband in connection with Marcus Thorne, but as he looked at those glossy financial projections, He found himself wondering what the real story was behind all those confidentiality agreements. Mary was replacing the coffee in the break room when she heard the voice that made her blood turn to ice. Deep, confident, achingly familiar. The same voice that had whispered promises in her ear 15 years ago, before she knew what those promises were worth. "I think this partnership is going to be very profitable for both of us, James." Marcus, here, in James's building, in James's conference room, calling James by his first name like they were old friends. Mary's hands trembled as she set down the coffee canister, her mind racing through the implications of what she had just heard. She moved closer to the conference room, staying in the shadows where she could see without being seen. There he was, Marcus Thorne, looking exactly as she remembered him, handsome, charming, completely believable. The same man who had convinced her to co-sign loans for his business ventures, who had assured her that the credit cards were for emergencies only, who had sworn that he would pay back every penny before she even noticed it was gone. The same man who had disappeared one Tuesday morning, leaving her with $73,000 in debt and a divorce attorney who charged more than she made in 6 months. "Your financial projections are impressive," James was saying, and Mary felt her heart sink. She knew those projections were lies. She had seen Marcus create similar documents before, beautiful presentations that made impossible promises with complete confidence. The only difference was that this time, someone she cared about was the target, someone she cared about. The thought stopped her cold. When had she started caring about James Vance as more than just her boss? When had his late-night presence in the office become a comfort rather than an inconvenience? When had she started looking forward to their brief conversations, to the way he treated her like a person rather than a service? "I will need to review everything with my board," James continued, and Mary felt a small surge of hope. He was being cautious. That was good. That was smart. Maybe he would see through Marcus's charm, the way she had been too young and naive to do. "Of course," Marcus replied smoothly. "I would be disappointed if you were anything less than thorough. Integrity is everything in this business." Mary bit back a bitter laugh. Integrity. Marcus had used that word with her too, usually right before he asked her to sign something that would make his lack of integrity her financial responsibility. She watched as the meeting concluded, as Marcus shook James's hand with that practiced warmth that made people forget to ask the right questions. After they left the conference room, Mary stood alone in the break room, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fury. She had to warn James. She had to find a way to tell him who Marcus really was, what he was capable of, how he operated. But how could she do that without revealing her own connection to the man? How could she explain that she knew Marcus was lying without admitting that she had once been foolish enough to fall for those same lies? The rest of her shift passed in a blur of routine tasks and racing thoughts. She cleaned offices mechanically, her mind focused on the problem of how to protect James from the man who had already destroyed her life once. By the time she reached his office, she had still not figured out what to say. James was at his desk, reviewing documents that she recognized as Marcus's financial projections. He looked up when she entered, giving her that familiar smile that made her chest tighten with something she was not ready to name. "Mary, how was your evening?" "Busy," she said, then hesitated. "Mr. Vance, may I ask you something?" "Always." "The man who was here earlier, the one you were meeting with, do you know him well?" James frowned, clearly curious about her interest. "Marcus Thorne? No, not well. We were introduced by a mutual contact. Why do you ask?" Mary felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This was her chance. She could tell him everything, who Marcus was, what he had done to her, how he operated. She could save James from the financial ruin that had taken her years to climb out of. but she could also lose her job. She could lose these quiet conversations, these moments of connection with the man who had somehow become important to her in ways she was afraid to examine. She could lose the stability she had fought so hard to build for herself and her son. She struggled for words. I just wanted to make sure you were being careful. Sometimes people are not who they seem to be. James studied her face with that careful attention he brought to everything important. Mary, is there something specific you want to tell me about Marcus? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Mary looked into James's eyes, those intelligent, kind eyes that had never looked at her with anything but respect, and felt her courage fail her. No, she said quietly. Just be careful. Trust your instincts. James nodded slowly, though she could see he was not entirely satisfied with her answer. I always do. Thank you for the advice. Mary finished her work in his office, hyper-aware of his presence as he continued reviewing Marcus's documents. When she prepared to leave, he looked up again. Mary, whatever you are worried about, I want you to know that I take your concerns seriously. If you change your mind about wanting to tell me more, I will listen. She met his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the genuine respect that had drawn her to him from the beginning. Thank you, Mr. Vance. That means more than you know. As she walked home through the empty streets, Mary wrestled with the knowledge that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She had had the chance to warn James, to protect him from Marcus's lies, and she had chosen silence instead. She had chosen to protect herself rather than the man who had treated her with more dignity in 4 years than her ex-husband had managed in 7 years of marriage. But what terrified her most was not the thought of James losing his business to Marcus's schemes. What terrified her was the growing realization that she was falling in love with a man who was completely out of her reach, and that her silence might cost him everything he had worked to build. Tomorrow, she would find the courage to tell him the truth. Tomorrow, she would put his welfare above her own fears. But tonight, she had to live with the knowledge that when it mattered most, she had chosen cowardice over the integrity she claimed to value. James could not shake the feeling that Mary knew something she was not telling him. Her warning about Marcus had been vague but urgent, and the worry in her eyes had been genuine. He had learned to trust his instincts about people over the years, and his instincts were telling him that Mary Parker was not the type of woman to express concerns lightly. He was still thinking about their conversation when his phone rang the next morning. David Richardson, returning his call about Marcus Thorne. James, good to hear from you, Richardson said, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man who had never met a deal he could not close. I hear you are considering a partnership with Marcus. Smart move. The man is a goldmine. He certainly presents well, James replied carefully. But I wanted to get your perspective on working with him. You know how I feel about due diligence. Richardson laughed. Still the cautious one, I see. Look, I will be straight with you. Marcus is aggressive, but he gets results. Sometimes you have to be willing to take calculated risks to see real growth. What kind of risks? Nothing illegal, if that is what you're worried about. Marcus just thinks bigger than most people. He is not afraid to leverage existing assets to maximize potential returns. James felt a familiar unease. In his experience, when people talked about leveraging assets and maximizing returns without providing specifics, it usually meant they were describing practices that sounded worse when you used plain English. Can you give me some concrete examples? James asked. Specific projects or partnerships that worked out well? There was a pause on the other end of the line. James, I'm going to level with you. My relationship with Marcus is more of a referral situation than a direct partnership. I connected him with some opportunities. He connected me with some opportunities, mutually beneficial, but not the kind of deep collaboration you are talking about. James felt his warning bells get louder. So you have not actually worked with him directly? Not in the way you mean, no. But the people I referred him to were very satisfied with the results. Would you be willing to put me in touch with them? Another pause. I would if I could. But most of those deals involved confidentiality agreements. You know how it is with high-level partnerships. James did know how it was with high-level partnerships. He also knew that successful partnerships usually created references who were happy to recommend future collaborations, confidentiality agreements or not. The fact that Richardson was being evasive about specifics only confirmed his growing suspicions about Marcus Thorne. I appreciate your honesty, David, James said, and I appreciate the referral. I will take everything you have said into consideration. After he hung up, James sat back in his chair and stared at Marcus's financial projections. Everything looked perfect on paper, too perfect. The numbers were aggressive, but not impossible. The market analysis was thorough, and the implementation timeline was realistic. But something about the whole package felt wrong. He thought about Mary again, about the genuine worry in her eyes when she had warned him to be careful. Mary, who had never asked him for anything, who had never tried to use their friendly relationship to gain any advantage. Mary, who had told him that integrity was not optional and that you could not build something lasting on a foundation of lies. James picked up his phone and called his attorney. Sarah, I need you to run a complete background check on a potential business partner, Marcus Thorne. I want to know everything, business history, financial records, legal issues, references, everything. How deep do you want me to go? Sarah asked. As deep as necessary. And Sarah, I need this quickly. I have a feeling time is a factor. You got it. I will have something for you by tomorrow afternoon. James hung up, feeling better than he had since Marcus first walked into his conference room. Maybe he was being paranoid. Maybe Marcus was exactly what he appeared to be, a successful businessman with aggressive growth strategies and a talent for making impressive presentations. But James had not built Vance Corporation by ignoring his instincts, and his instincts were telling him that something was not right. That evening, as he worked late in his office, James found himself looking forward to Mary's arrival with more anticipation than usual. He wanted to tell her about his conversation with Richardson, about his decision to investigate Marcus more thoroughly. He wanted to see if the worry in her eyes would ease when she learned that he was taking her advice seriously. But when Mary arrived for her shift, she seemed different, distracted. She went about her work with the same quiet efficiency as always, but there was a tension in her shoulders that had not been there before. Mary, he said as she cleaned his bookshelf, is everything all right? She paused, her hand tightening on the dustcloth. Everything is fine, Mr. Vance, just tired. James studied her profile, noting the way she avoided his eyes. Are you sure? You seem upset about something. Mary turned to face him, and James saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten. Fear. Not the kind of fear that came from being worried about job security, but the deeper kind that came from being afraid of losing something precious. Mr. Vance, she said quietly, if someone you cared about was about to make a terrible mistake, but telling them the truth might cost you everything you had worked for, what would you do? The question hit James like a physical blow. He stood up from his desk, moving closer to her, drawn by the vulnerability in her voice. I would tell them the truth, he said without hesitation, because if I really cared about them, their welfare would be more important than my own security. Mary's eyes filled with tears. She was trying hard not to shed. Even if they might not believe you, even if they might think you were lying for your own benefit. James felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Mary, what is this about? What truth are you afraid to tell me? She looked at him for a long moment, and James saw her make a decision. The fear was still there, but it was joined by something else. Determination. The same quiet strength that had drawn him to her from the beginning. Marcus Thorne, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He is my ex-husband. The words hung in the air between them like a confession and a warning all at once. James felt the world shift around him, pieces of a puzzle falling into place with sudden, terrible clarity. Mary, he said softly, tell me everything. Mary sat in the chair across from James's desk, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. She had never told anyone the whole story of her marriage to Marcus, not her friends, not her family, not even her divorce attorney. But looking into James's eyes, seeing the patient attention he gave to everything that mattered, she knew she owed him nothing less than the complete truth. I was 22 when I met him, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Fresh out of college, working at a small accounting firm downtown, Marcus was a client. Charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted in a man. He was 30 then, already running his own consulting business. He seemed so sophisticated compared to the boys I had dated in college. James leaned forward slightly, his full attention focused on her words. What was his business? Investment consulting, he said. Helping small businesses optimize their financial strategies. He had an office in one of the nice buildings downtown, impressive presentations, references from satisfied clients. Everything looked legitimate. Mary paused, remembering how impressed she had been by Marcus's confidence, his apparent success, how young and naive she had been to mistake charm for character. We were married within a year, she continued. Marcus said he wanted to expand his business, and he needed someone he could trust to help with the financial side. I was flattered. I thought he respected my training, my skills. I thought we were building something together, but you were not, James said quietly. No, Mary's voice was barely audible. I was providing legitimacy and collateral. Within 6 months of our marriage, Marcus had convinced me to co-sign loans for business expansion. Then it was credit cards for temporary cash flow issues. Then it was a second mortgage on the house we had bought together. Always with explanations that made perfect sense. Always with promises that the investments would pay off soon. James felt anger building in his chest, not at Mary, but at the man who had used her trust so callously. How long did it take you to realize what was happening? 3 years. 3 years of watching the debt pile up while Marcus's business seemed to be thriving. He always had explanations, market fluctuations, delayed payments from clients, temporary setbacks. I wanted to believe him. I loved him, and I thought he loved me. Mary's voice broke slightly on the last words, and James had to resist the urge to reach across the desk and take her hand. The pain in her expression was raw, real, and it made him want to find Marcus Thorne and make him pay for every tear he had caused. What finally opened your eyes? James asked gently. I got pregnant, Mary said, her voice growing stronger. David, when I found out I was going to be a mother, I started asking harder questions about our finances. I wanted to make sure we were stable, that we could provide for our child. Marcus kept putting me off, telling me not to worry, that everything was under control. She paused, gathering herself for what James sensed was the most difficult part of the story. One day, I came home early from a doctor's appointment and found Marcus in his office, on the phone with someone. He was laughing, talking about how easy it had been to get his wife to sign the papers, how I trusted him completely, never questioned anything he put in front of me, how I was the perfect cover for his operation. James felt his hands clench into fists. Mary, I am so sorry. I confronted him that night, Mary continued, her voice steady now, strengthened by the memory of finally finding her courage. He did not even try to deny it. He said I should be grateful for the lifestyle he had provided, that I had gotten more out of the marriage than I had contributed. He said if I tried to leave him, I would be responsible for all the debt, that I would lose everything. But you left anyway. I did. It took me 2 years to save enough money to hire a divorce attorney. 2 years of pretending everything was fine while I planned my escape. When I finally filed for divorce, Marcus had already moved most of his assets offshore. I ended up responsible for $73,000 in debt that I had co-signed for, while he walked away free and clear. James felt his protective instincts surge. The thought of Mary, pregnant and alone, facing that kind of financial devastation because she had trusted the wrong man, made him want to find Marcus and make him pay for every ounce of pain he had caused. "How did you manage?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I worked 3 jobs for 2 years, Mary said simply. Days at a temp agency, evenings at a restaurant, nights cleaning offices. I paid off every penny of that debt, and I swore I would never let anyone take advantage of me like that again." "Mary," James said softly, "you are the strongest person I know." She looked at him with surprise, as if she had never considered that her struggle might be seen as strength rather than failure. "I was stupid. I trusted someone I should not have trusted." "You were young and in love," James corrected. "Marcus was the one who chose to abuse that trust. None of what happened was your fault." Mary felt tears threaten again, not from sadness this time, but from the unexpected relief of finally being believed. Finally being seen as the victim rather than the fool. "Thank you for saying that." "I am not just saying it, Mary, I mean it." James stood up and moved around his desk, sitting in the chair beside hers instead of across from her. "And I want you to know that I am going to make sure Marcus does not get the chance to do to my company what he did to you." "You believe me?" Mary asked, her voice small with hope and fear. "I believe you," James said firmly. "Everything you have told me matches what I have been discovering through my own investigation. Marcus Thorne is a predator, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." Mary felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for 12 years. Someone believed her. Someone was going to stand up to Marcus. Someone was going to make sure he could not hurt anyone else the way he had hurt her. "What are you going to do?" she asked. James smiled, and Mary saw something in his expression that made her heart race. It was not just anger at Marcus, though that was certainly there. It was something warmer, something that looked almost like admiration. "I am going to expose him," James said, "and I am going to make sure he never gets the chance to hurt you again." James spent the weekend researching Marcus Thorne with the methodical precision he brought to every important business decision. What he discovered made his blood run cold. 3 failed partnerships in the past 5 years, each following the same pattern: impressive initial presentations, aggressive growth promises, and eventual financial collapse that left the partners holding worthless debt while Marcus disappeared with liquid assets. Sarah, his attorney, had been thorough. Court records showed a pattern of civil suits, all settled out of court with confidentiality agreements that prevented the victims from warning others. The most recent case was barely 18 months old. A small manufacturing company in Ohio that had lost everything in a deal that looked remarkably similar to what Marcus was proposing to Vance Corporation. On Monday morning, James called Marcus to schedule their final meeting. "James, perfect timing," Marcus said, his voice carrying that familiar note of manufactured enthusiasm. "I was just putting the finishing touches on our formal presentation. My team is very excited about moving forward." "I'm sure they are," James replied, keeping his tone neutral. "I think we should meet this afternoon to discuss the next steps. Can you be here at 3 o'clock? Absolutely. Should I bring the full team for the board presentation? No, James said quietly. I think this should be just the two of us. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and James could almost hear Marcus recalibrating. Of course. Whatever you prefer. I will see you at 3. James hung up and immediately called building security. He wanted them prepared for the possibility that Marcus might not take rejection well. Men like Marcus rarely did. At 2:30, James was reviewing his notes when Mary appeared in his doorway. She was not scheduled to work until evening, but she stood there in her day clothes, simple but neat, looking nervous and determined. Mr. Vance, she said, I know I am not supposed to be here during business hours, but I wanted to ask if you need me to stay for the meeting with Marcus. I mean, in case he tries to claim I am lying about who he is. James felt his chest tighten with something that was becoming increasingly familiar when he looked at Mary Parker. Admiration, protectiveness, something deeper that he was not quite ready to name. Mary, you do not need to put yourself through that, he said gently. I have more than enough evidence to handle Marcus without requiring you to face him. But I want to, Mary said, stepping into his office. For 12 years, I have been afraid of that man, afraid of what he might do, what he might say, how he might try to hurt me or my son. I am tired of being afraid. James stood up, moved by the quiet strength in her voice. Are you sure? It will not be pleasant. I am sure. Mary met his eyes with a steadiness that made his heart race. You believed me when I told you the truth. You are protecting me when you do not have to. The least I can do is stand beside you when you confront him. James felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition that went beyond professional respect or friendly concern. Mary Parker was not just brave, she was extraordinary. And she was choosing to trust him with that courage. All right, he said, but I want you to stay in the outer office with my assistant. If Marcus becomes aggressive or threatening in any way, I want you where security can reach you immediately. Mary nodded, then hesitated. Mr. Vance, thank you for believing me, for protecting me. I know you did not have to do any of this. James moved closer to her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, close enough to catch the faint scent of her shampoo. Mary, protecting you is not something I have to do. It is something I want to do. The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than either of them was prepared to acknowledge. Mary felt her breath catch as she looked up into James's face, seeing something in his expression that made her heart pound with hope and terror in equal measure. Mary, James said softly, and she heard her name in his voice like a question and a promise all at once. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, until the sound of the elevator in the hallway reminded them both where they were and what was about to happen. James stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place, but Mary caught the reluctance in his movement. I should let you prepare, she said, her voice slightly breathless. Yes, James agreed, though he made no move to return to his desk. Mary, after this is over, we should talk about what comes next. Mary nodded, not trusting her voice, and slipped out of his office. She spent the next 20 minutes in the outer office, trying to calm her racing heart and wondering what James had meant by what comes next. Did he mean her job, their friendship, or something else entirely? At exactly 3 o'clock, Marcus Thorne walked into the Vance Corporation offices with the confidence of a man who had never met a deal he could not close. He was impeccably dressed, perfectly groomed, radiating the kind of charm that had fooled Mary 12 years ago and countless others since then. Mary watched from behind the reception desk as he approached James's office and felt a familiar chill of fear mixed with something new, a fierce, protective anger on James's behalf. Marcus was about to discover that James Vance was nothing like the naive young woman he had manipulated and destroyed. "Marcus," James said as his visitor entered the conference room, "thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Marcus settled into his chair with practiced ease, his leather portfolio arranged perfectly beside him. "I have to tell you, James, I am very excited about what we discussed last week. I think this partnership could be the beginning of something extraordinary." "I think you are right," James said quietly. "It will definitely be extraordinary." Something in James's tone made Marcus pause, his salesman instincts picking up a subtle shift in the atmosphere. "You sound like you have some concerns. I hope my references checked out to your satisfaction." James smiled, and Mary shivered at the cold precision in that expression. "Your references were very illuminating, Marcus. Particularly the ones you did not want me to contact." Marcus's confident mask slipped for just a moment before snapping back into place. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean the 3 partnerships that ended in bankruptcy," James said calmly. "I mean the pattern of civil suits, all settled with confidentiality agreements to prevent your victims from warning others. I mean the manufacturing company in Ohio that lost everything to your aggressive growth strategies just 18 months ago." Marcus's face went very still. "I think there has been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," James continued, his voice gaining strength. "I know exactly who you are, Marcus. I know what you do. You find successful companies with assets you can leverage. You convince them to take on debt in your name, and then you disappear when the bills come due." Marcus stood up abruptly, his charming facade finally cracking. "You do not know what you are talking about. I have built legitimate businesses with satisfied partners." "Partners like Mary?" James asked quietly. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His eyes darted toward the door, and Mary knew he was calculating whether James was bluffing or if she had actually found him again. "I do not know anyone named Mary," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mary Parker," James said, standing to match Marcus's height. "Your ex-wife, the woman you left with $73,000 in debt while you moved your assets offshore. The woman whose trust you betrayed and whose life you nearly destroyed." Marcus's face went white, then red with fury. "That lying little, where is she? Did she put you up to this?" James felt a surge of protective rage that he had never experienced before. "Mary is under my protection now, and if you ever speak about her that way again, you will answer to me personally." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your protection? Do you have any idea what kind of woman you are defending? She was nobody when I married her, a naive little bookkeeper who could not balance her own checkbook. I gave her everything, a beautiful home, a lifestyle she never could have afforded on her own." "You gave her debt," James said coldly. "You gave her betrayal. You gave her years of struggling to clean up the mess you left behind. I gave her more than she deserved," Marcus snarled, his true nature finally showing through. "And if she thinks she can use you to get some kind of revenge against me, she's going to be very disappointed." James moved around the conference table, closing the distance between them. "Marcus, you are going to leave my building now. You are never going to contact me again. You are never going to contact Mary again. And you are never going to set foot on Vance Corporation property again. If you violate any of these conditions, I will make sure every potential business partner in the city knows exactly what kind of man you really are." Marcus grabbed his portfolio, his hands shaking with rage. "You are making a huge mistake, Vance. I could have made you rich." "I would rather be poor than be like you," James said with quiet finality. Marcus stormed toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "Tell Mary I said hello. Tell her some things never change. Tell her I know where to find her if I need to." James felt something dangerous rise in his chest. Are you threatening her? I am stating a fact, Marcus said with a cold smile. This city is not that big, and Mary has always been easy to find when I need her. James reached for his phone. Security. I need an escort for Mr. Thorne, immediately, and I want him added to the permanent exclusion list. Within moments, 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Marcus straightened his tie and reclaimed his practiced smile. But James could see the fury burning in his eyes. This is not over, Marcus said quietly, as the guards flanked him. Yes, James replied, it is. After Marcus was escorted from the building, James stood alone in the conference room, his heart pounding with adrenaline and protective fury. The threat against Mary had been unmistakable, and James found himself consumed with the need to make sure she was safe. He walked to his office door and saw Mary standing beside his assistant's desk, her face pale, but her spine straight. She had heard everything, he realized. She had heard Marcus threaten her, and she was still standing there, still trusting James to protect her. Mary, he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. Are you all right? She looked up at him, and James saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. Not fear, though that was there too. Gratitude, trust, something deeper that made him want to cross the room and pull her into his arms. I am fine, she said, though her voice trembled slightly. Thank you for everything you said to him, for defending me. James felt the distance between them like a physical ache. Mary, we need to talk about what Marcus said, about knowing where to find you. Mary nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. He knows where I live, where David goes to school. I never tried to hide after the divorce. I thought he was done with me. He is done with you, James said firmly. I am going to make sure of that. How? Mary asked, and James heard the fear she was trying to hide. James looked at her standing there, brave, beautiful, trusting him to keep her safe, and felt something click into place in his chest, a certainty that went beyond professional obligation or even friendship. By making sure you are never alone with him again, James said, by making sure he knows that if he wants to get to you, he has to go through me first. Mary felt her breath catch at the intensity in James's voice, at the promise she heard there. Mr. Vance, James, he said quietly, I think we are past formalities now, do not you? Mary nodded, her heart racing at the way he said his name, like he was offering her something precious. James, I do not know how to thank you. James moved closer, drawn by something he was no longer trying to resist. You do not need to thank me, Mary. Protecting you is not a favor. It is a privilege. The words hung between them, charged with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to voice. Mary looked up into James's face and saw something there that made her feel like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. What happens now? She asked softly. James looked down at her, at this extraordinary woman who had trusted him with her truth, who had stood beside him as he faced down her tormentor, who was looking at him now with hope and trust and something that looked like the beginning of love. Now, he said, his voice low and certain, we make sure you are safe, and then we figure out what comes next. James insisted on driving Mary home that evening, despite her protests that she could take the bus, as she always did. The thought of her walking alone through the city streets after Marcus's thinly veiled threat made his protective instincts surge in ways he had never experienced before. This is really not necessary, Mary said as they sat in his car outside her apartment building. Marcus was just trying to scare me. He probably does not even remember my address. James turned to look at her, noting the way she held herself straight and strong, but with a tension around her eyes that betrayed her worry. Mary, men like Marcus do not make idle threats. He is angry and humiliated, and he sees you as the cause. That makes you a target. Mary sighed, looking up at the modest three-story building where she had lived for the past 8 years. I cannot live my life in fear of him, James. I did that for too long already. I'm not asking you to live in fear, James said gently. I'm asking you to be smart. Let me help you. Mary turned to study his profile in the dim light from the street lamp. Even after the confrontation with Marcus, even after learning the ugly details of her past, James was still here, still offering to help, still treating her like someone worth protecting. Why? She asked quietly. Why are you doing all this for someone like me? James felt his chest tighten at the question, at the assumption underlying it, that she was somehow not worthy of protection and care. Someone like you. Mary, do you have any idea how remarkable you are? Mary looked down at her hands, uncomfortable with the intensity in his voice. I am a night janitor with a high school education and more debt than assets. You are the CEO of a major corporation. We live in completely different worlds. James unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to face her fully. Mary, look at me. She raised her eyes reluctantly, and James felt his heart pound at the vulnerability he saw there. I have spent the last 3 years surrounded by people who want something from me, he said. Board members who want higher profits, employees who want promotions, business partners who want access to my company's assets. Everyone I meet has an agenda, everyone has an angle, everyone except you. Mary frowned. I do not understand. For 4 years, you have cleaned my office, James continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. You have had access to confidential documents, sensitive information, valuable equipment. You could have taken advantage of that access 100 different ways. You could have sold information, stolen supplies, used your position to gain leverage over me, but you never did. That would have been wrong, Mary said simply. Exactly, James said, leaning closer. You did not avoid stealing from me because you were afraid of getting caught. You avoided it because it was wrong. Do you have any idea how rare that kind of integrity is in my world? Mary felt heat rise in her cheeks at the praise, at the way James was looking at her like she was something precious rather than ordinary. You stood up to Marcus today, James continued. You faced the man who destroyed your life because you wanted to protect me from making the same mistake you did. You put my welfare ahead of your own safety. Mary, that is not the behavior of someone ordinary. That is the behavior of someone extraordinary. Mary felt tears threaten at the sincerity in his voice, at the way he saw strength where she had always seen failure. I was terrified, she admitted. Being brave does not mean you are not afraid, James said softly. It means you do the right thing despite being afraid. You have been brave every day for 12 years, Mary. You just never had anyone tell you that before. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between them. Mary looked out at her building, then back at James, and felt something shift in her chest. A recognition that this man saw her in ways she had never seen herself. Would you like to come up? She asked suddenly, then immediately regretted the impulse. I mean, just for coffee, to meet David. He should be home from his father's house by now. James felt his pulse quicken at the invitation, at the trust it represented. Mary was offering to let him into her private world, to meet the son who was the center of her universe. It was not a casual invitation. I would like that very much, he said. Mary's apartment was small but warm, filled with evidence of a life lived with care and intention despite limited resources. Books lined makeshift shelves, family photos covered the refrigerator, and everything was spotlessly clean. James could see Mary's attention to detail in every corner, her determination to create beauty and comfort regardless of budget constraints. Mom? A young voice called from the back of the apartment. Is that you? "Yes, honey," Mary called back. "I brought someone I would like you to meet." David Parker emerged from what James assumed was his bedroom, a 12-year-old boy with his mother's dark hair and intelligent eyes. He was tall for his age, all elbows and knees, but he carried himself with a confidence that reminded James of Mary. "David, this is Mr. Vance," Mary said. "He is my boss at the office building where I work." David extended his hand with the serious formality of a child who had been taught proper manners. "Nice to meet you, sir." James shook the offered hand, impressed by the boy's firm grip and direct gaze. "Nice to meet you too, David. Your mother has told me a lot about you." "She talks about you sometimes too," David said, then caught his mother's warning look. "I mean, she mentions work stuff." James smiled, charmed by the boy's honesty and by the slight blush that colored Mary's cheeks. "What grade are you in, David?" "7th. I am on the honor roll and the debate team." David's pride was evident, and James could see where it came from. In a single-parent household with limited resources, academic achievement was probably highly valued and celebrated. "Debate team," James said, impressed. "What kinds of topics do you debate?" "Last month, we debated whether schools should require uniforms," David said, warming to the subject. "I argued against it. I said that forcing conformity stifles individual expression and creates a false sense of equality that does not address the real issues of educational inequality." James felt his eyebrows rise. "That is a sophisticated argument for a 7th grader. Mom helps me research and practice," David said, glancing at Mary with obvious affection. "She says learning to think critically is the most important skill anyone can develop." James looked at Mary, seeing her through new eyes, not just a single mother working night shifts to make ends meet, but a woman who was actively shaping a bright, thoughtful young man despite every obstacle life had thrown at her. "Your mother is a very wise woman," James said, and meant it. David nodded seriously. "She is the smartest person I know. She was going to be an accountant before she had me, but she says raising me has been more rewarding than any career could have been." James saw Mary's expression tighten slightly, and he realized that David probably did not know the full story of why his mother had never pursued her accounting career. Another sacrifice she had made, another dream deferred by Marcus's betrayal. "Well," James said carefully, "there are many different kinds of success in life. Raising a son like you is definitely one of them." Mary busied herself making coffee, but James could see the emotion in her movements. He wondered how often anyone had validated her choices, how often anyone had recognized the extraordinary job she was doing as a mother. "Mr. Vance," David said suddenly, "are you the reason Mom seemed happier lately?" "David!" Mary's voice carried a note of mortification, but David continued with the directness of youth. "She has been different the past few months. Less worried, more, I do not know, like she is not carrying the whole world on her shoulders anymore." James felt his chest tighten at the observation, at the idea that his presence in Mary's life had somehow lightened her burden. "I think your mother is happier because she is an incredibly strong person who has worked very hard to build a good life for both of you." "Yeah," David agreed, "but I think having someone notice how hard she works probably helps too." The simple wisdom of the statement hit James like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had noticed how hard Mary worked? When was the last time anyone had seen her sacrifices, her struggles, her quiet daily acts of courage? "You are right," James said quietly, looking at Mary as she set coffee cups on the small kitchen table. "Your mother deserves to have people notice how remarkable she is." Mary met his eyes across the kitchen, and James saw something there that made his heart race. Gratitude, yes, but something deeper. Something that looked like the beginning of hope that maybe, just maybe, She deserved the kind of care and attention she had been giving everyone else for so long. "David," Mary said, her voice slightly unsteady, "why do not you finish your homework while Mr. Vance and I have our coffee?" David nodded and disappeared back to his room, leaving James and Mary alone in the small kitchen. They sat across from each other at the table that had probably seen 1,000 meals, 1,000 homework sessions, 1,000 conversations between mother and son. "He is an amazing kid," James said. "He is everything to me," Mary replied simply. James looked around the modest apartment, seeing the evidence of love and sacrifice in every corner. "Mary, you have built something beautiful here. Despite everything Marcus put you through, despite all the obstacles, you have created a warm, loving home and raised an incredible son. That takes strength most people do not have." Mary looked down at her coffee cup, overwhelmed by the praise. "I just did what I had to do." "No," James said firmly, "you did what you chose to do. You chose to fight for your son's future. You chose to work 3 jobs to pay off debt that was not really yours. You chose to build a life based on integrity and love instead of letting Marcus's betrayal make you bitter. Those were choices, Mary, hard choices that required enormous courage." Mary felt tears threaten again, not from sadness, but from the unexpected relief of being seen, truly seen, by someone who understood the magnitude of what she had accomplished. "James," she said softly, "I need you to know something. What you did today, standing up to Marcus, protecting me, no one has ever done anything like that for me before. I do not know how to process that someone would put themselves at risk for my sake." James reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The first time he had touched her beyond a handshake, her skin was soft and warm, and he felt electricity shoot up his arm at the contact. "Mary," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "protecting you is not a risk. It is a privilege, and if Marcus thinks he can intimidate you or threaten you, he's going to learn that you have someone in your corner now who will not back down." Mary looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his manicured fingers and her work-worn ones, and felt her heart pound with possibility and terror in equal measure. "What are we doing, James?" she asked quietly. James squeezed her hand gently, his thumb tracing circles on her knuckles. "I do not know," he admitted, "but I know that I care about you. I know that the thought of Marcus hurting you makes me angrier than I have ever been in my life. And I know that sitting here with you and David feels more like home than anywhere I have been in years." Mary felt her breath catch at the honesty in his voice, at the vulnerability he was showing her. "James, I am not the kind of woman who fits into your world. Maybe my world needs someone exactly like you," James said softly. "Maybe I need someone exactly like you." The words hung between them, a confession and a question all at once. Mary looked into his eyes and saw something there that made her heart race with hope and fear in equal measure. This was uncharted territory for both of them, a connection that crossed every boundary of class and circumstance. "I am scared," Mary admitted. "So am I," James said, "but I am more scared of not finding out what this could be." Mary squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his touch, from his honesty, from the way he looked at her like she was worth fighting for. "Then maybe," she said quietly, "we should find out together." The next morning, James found himself unable to concentrate on anything beyond Mary's safety. He had barely slept, his mind cycling through worst-case scenarios involving Marcus and the very real threat he posed. By 10 o'clock, he had made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. He called Mary's cell phone, a number he had obtained for emergency contact purposes but never used. "Hello?" Mary's voice was cautious. She was not accustomed to receiving calls during the day. "Mary, it is James. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "No, not at all. I was just doing some grocery shopping. Is everything all right?" James could hear traffic in the background, the everyday sounds of Mary going about her life, and he felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. "I want to offer you something," he said without preamble. "A different position at Vance Corporation. Administrative assistant to the executive team. Day shift, better pay, health benefits for you and David." There was silence on the other end of the line, and James found himself holding his breath. "James," Mary said finally, "you cannot create a job for me just because you are worried about Marcus." "I am not creating a job," James said truthfully. "I have been needing an administrative assistant for months. My current assistant is overwhelmed, and I have been putting off hiring additional help because I could not find someone I trusted. Someone with integrity, attention to detail, and the ability to handle confidential information. But I am not qualified for that kind of position. I clean offices, James. I do not have the education or experience for executive-level administrative work." James felt frustration rise in his chest, not at Mary, but at the way she consistently undervalued herself. "Mary, you have been observing the inner workings of my company for 4 years. You know more about our operations than most of our middle managers. You are intelligent, reliable, and trustworthy. Those are the qualifications that matter most. The other employees will think you are showing favoritism," Mary said, but James could hear the longing in her voice. "Let me worry about the other employees," James said firmly. "Mary, this is not charity. This is a legitimate business opportunity that benefits both of us. You need better pay and day shift hours, and I need someone I can trust completely." "It makes perfect sense." Mary stopped walking, standing still on the sidewalk as the implications of what James was offering began to sink in. A day job, health insurance, the ability to be home with David in the evenings, an end to the exhaustion of cleaning office buildings until 3 in the morning. "There is something else," James continued, his voice gentler now. "If you are working in the main office during business hours, Marcus cannot approach you without going through security. You would be safe." And there it was, the real reason behind the offer. James was trying to protect her, to keep her close where he could make sure Marcus could not hurt her. Mary felt her heart swell with an emotion she was afraid to name. "James," she said softly, "I do not know what to say." "Say yes," James replied. "Say you will let me help you. Say you trust me enough to take this chance." Mary closed her eyes, standing in the middle of the sidewalk while people flowed around her, and made a decision that would change everything. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will take the job." James felt relief flood through him so powerfully that he had to sit down. "Thank you. Can you come in this afternoon? I would like to show you around the office, introduce you to the team." "I will need to arrange for someone to pick up David from school," Mary said, and James could hear the smile in her voice. "But yes, I can be there by 2 o'clock. "Mary," James said, as they prepared to hang up. "Yes? Welcome to your new life." That afternoon, James watched Mary step off the elevator into the executive offices of Vance Corporation, and he felt his breath catch. She was wearing a simple navy dress that he suspected was her best interview outfit, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her posture straight with nervous determination. She looked professional, competent, and completely out of place in a way that made his protective instincts surge. "Mary," he said, crossing the lobby to greet her, "you look perfect." Mary felt heat rise in her cheeks at the compliment, at the way James was looking at her like she belonged there. "I feel like I am pretending to be someone I am not." "You are not pretending anything," James said firmly. You are simply stepping into a role that recognizes your actual capabilities instead of limiting you to what people assume about night janitors. He guided her through the offices, introducing her to the staff with a confidence that made it clear this was not a temporary arrangement or a favor to a friend. Mary was his new administrative assistant, and she was to be treated with the respect that position commanded. Mary will be handling scheduling, correspondence, and special projects. James explained to his department heads. She has extensive knowledge of our operations and my complete confidence. I expect you to extend her the same cooperation you would give me. Mary watched the faces of the executives as James spoke, seeing the curiosity and calculation there. They were wondering who she was, how she had earned James's trust so quickly, what her connection to him might be beyond professional. She felt exposed and uncomfortable under their scrutiny. "Do not worry about them," James said quietly as they walked to what would be her new office, a small but well-appointed space adjacent to his own. "They are just curious because I have never hired anyone without putting them through 6 months of interviews and background checks." "Why did you hire me?" Mary asked, settling into the chair behind her new desk. "The real reason, beyond protecting me from Marcus." James studied her face, seeing the genuine question there, the need to understand what she had done to earn this opportunity. "Because in 4 years of watching you work, I have never seen you take a shortcut, never seen you do anything halfway, never seen you treat any task as beneath your dignity, because you are the only person I know who would risk everything to warn someone about a danger you had no obligation to reveal." He moved closer to her desk, his voice growing more intense. "Because when I offered you this position, your first concern was not what you could gain from it, but whether it would be fair to the other employees. Mary, that kind of integrity is not just rare, it is invaluable." Mary felt overwhelmed by the praise, by the way James saw her as something more than she had ever seen herself. "What if I fail? What if I'm not smart enough or educated enough for this kind of work?" James leaned against her desk, bringing himself to her eye level. "Mary, you have been successfully managing a household budget on limited resources for 12 years. You have navigated the legal system to finalize your divorce and pay off debt that was not your responsibility. You have raised a brilliant, well-adjusted son while working multiple jobs. If you can do all that, you can certainly handle scheduling meetings and managing correspondence." Mary looked around her new office, at the computer that would be hers to use, at the view of the city beyond her window, and felt something she had not experienced in years. Hope, not just for survival, but for actual advancement, for the possibility that her life could be more than just getting by. "James," she said quietly, "I will not let you down." "I know you will not," James replied with complete certainty, "because that is not who you are." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of training sessions, system passwords, and introductions to company procedures. Mary absorbed everything with the focused attention she brought to any new challenge, determined to prove that James's faith in her was justified. As the 5 o'clock hour approached, Mary realized she was experiencing something she had never had before. The luxury of leaving work at a reasonable hour to spend the evening with her son. No more rushing from one job to the next. No more collapsing into bed, exhausted at 4 in the morning, only to wake up 6 hours later to get David ready for school. "Mary," James said as she gathered her things to leave, "how does it feel, your first day in corporate America?" Mary looked up at him, seeing the genuine interest in his eyes, the way he cared about her adjustment to this new role. "Terrifying and wonderful at the same time," she admitted, "like I am living someone else's life." "You are living your own life," James corrected gently. "Maybe for the first time in years," Mary nodded, feeling the truth of that statement settle in her chest. "James, thank you for believing in me, for giving me this chance. I know you did not have to do it." James moved closer to her, drawn by the gratitude and hope in her expression. "Mary, I did not give you anything you did not earn. I just finally gave you the opportunity to show what you are capable of." They stood there for a moment, the office quiet around them, the weight of everything that had changed between them hanging in the air. Mary looked up into James's face and saw something there that made her heart race. The same awareness she was feeling, the recognition that they were moving into territory neither of them had mapped. "I should go," Mary said softly, though she made no move to leave. "David will be wondering where I am." "Yes," James agreed, though he did not step back. "Mary, yes, I am proud of you for today, for taking this chance, for being brave enough to let your life change." Mary felt tears threaten at the simple words, at the pride in his voice that she had never heard from anyone before. "Thank you for making the change possible." James watched her gather her purse and coat, watched her transform from his administrative assistant back into David's mother, and felt something settle in his chest. Having Mary close during the day, knowing she was safe, being able to see her competence and intelligence recognized, it felt right in a way that went beyond professional satisfaction. "Mary!" he called as she reached the door. She turned back, and James felt his heart skip at the way she looked at him, with trust and affection and something deeper that neither of them was quite ready to name. "Sweet dreams," he said softly. Mary smiled, the first completely unguarded smile he had ever seen from her. "Sweet dreams, James." After she left, James stood alone in his office, looking out at the city beyond his windows, and realized that for the first time in 3 years of running Vance Corporation, he was looking forward to coming to work tomorrow. Not because of deals to be made or profits to be earned, but because Mary Parker would be there, bringing her quiet strength and steady presence to his chaotic corporate world. He was falling in love with her. The realization hit him with startling clarity as he watched her small figure disappear into the evening crowd below. He was falling in love with a woman who cleaned his office, who had trusted him with her darkest secret, who was brave enough to stand up to the man who had destroyed her life. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it filled him with a sense of rightness he had never experienced before. Mary Parker was worth falling in love with. The question was whether she would ever believe she was worth loving. Marcus Thorne was not accustomed to being told no, and he was certainly not accustomed to being escorted from buildings by security guards. The humiliation burned in his chest as he sat in his rental car outside Vance Corporation, watching the evening exodus of employees through the glass lobby. He had underestimated James Vance. The man had seemed like the perfect mark, successful but not suspicious, wealthy but not paranoid. Marcus had been so confident that his usual combination of charm and impressive presentations would close the deal that he had not prepared for the possibility of serious background investigation. But it was Mary who had really ruined everything. Mary, who should have been grateful for the life he had given her, who should have disappeared into obscurity after their divorce instead of resurfacing to destroy his carefully planned operation. Marcus felt a familiar rage building as he thought about her betrayal, her ingratitude, her presumption in thinking she could interfere with his business. He was so focused on his anger that he almost missed her. But there she was, emerging from the executive elevator instead of the service entrance he remembered from their brief marriage. Mary, wearing a dress instead of a cleaning uniform, carrying a purse instead of a supply cart, looking like she belonged in the corporate world instead of cleaning up after it. Marcus felt his blood pressure spike as the implications became clear. Vance had not just rejected his partnership offer, he had hired Mary. The man was protecting her, probably promoting her, certainly paying her more than she was worth. It was a slap in the face that went beyond business rejection into personal insult. He followed her at a distance as she walked to the bus stop, noting her confident posture. The way she moved like someone who belonged in the daylight world of business instead of skulking around empty buildings at night. Someone had convinced Mary Parker that she was worth more than he had told her she was worth, and Marcus found that presumption almost as infuriating as the lost business opportunity. When Mary boarded the bus, Marcus made a decision. If James Vance wanted to make this personal by hiring his ex-wife, then Marcus would show him exactly how personal things could get. There were ways to hurt people that had nothing to do with business partnerships, and Marcus had learned most of them over the years. He pulled out his phone and made a call to a private investigator he had used before, a man who specialized in finding information that people preferred to keep private. "I need a complete background check," Marcus said when the man answered. "James Vance, CEO of Vance Corporation. I want to know everything: family, finances, business dealings, personal relationships, everything he cares about, everything he wants to protect, and I want it fast." "How fast?" the investigator asked. "I want it yesterday," Marcus replied, "and I want you to pay special attention to any connection he might have to a woman named Mary Parker. I have a feeling that relationship is going to be very interesting." After he hung up, Marcus sat in his car and planned his next move. James Vance thought he could humiliate him and walk away without consequences. James Vance thought he could protect Mary from the natural results of her betrayal. James Vance was about to learn that some men did not accept rejection gracefully, and that protecting someone always created vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Marcus smiled for the first time since being escorted from the Vance Corporation building. If James wanted to play protector, Marcus would show him exactly how dangerous that role could be. Meanwhile, Mary was experiencing her first evening of freedom in years. She arrived home at 6:30 instead of 4 in the morning, had dinner with David instead of collapsing into exhausted sleep, and actually had energy to help him with his homework instead of just checking that it was completed. "Mom," David said as they worked through his algebra problems together, "you seem different today." "Happy different." Mary looked up from the equations, seeing her son's curious expression. "I got a new job today, a better job. Day shift, better pay, working in an office instead of cleaning them." David's face lit up with excitement. "Really? That is awesome. What kind of office work?" "Administrative assistant to the executive team at Vance Corporation," Mary said, still not quite believing it herself. "I will be working directly for Mr. Vance, the man you met yesterday." David nodded thoughtfully. He seemed nice. "And he obviously thinks you are smart, or he would not have offered you the job." Mary felt her heart swell at her son's matter-of-fact confidence in her abilities. "I hope I can live up to his expectations." "Mom," David said seriously, "you are the hardest working person I know. You're going to be great at whatever you do." Mary leaned over and hugged her son, overwhelmed by his faith in her, by the possibility that her life was finally moving in a direction that would give them both more opportunities. "David," she said, "things are going to be better now. I promise." David hugged her back, and Mary felt a peace she had not experienced in years. For the first time since her divorce, she was not just surviving, she was building something better. That night, as Mary prepared for bed at a reasonable hour for the first time in years, her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and felt her blood freeze. Marcus. Somehow, he had gotten her number. She let it go to voicemail, but the damage was done. The peace she had felt just moments before evaporated, replaced by the familiar fear that had dominated her life for so long. Marcus was not going to let this go. He was not going to accept that she had found someone willing to protect her, someone who saw her worth. The voicemail light blinked insistently, and after several minutes of staring at it, Mary finally played the message. "Hello, Mary." Marcus's voice was smooth, controlled, but she could hear the anger underneath. "I heard about your new job, moving up in the world. Are we? I hope you realize that your new protector has no idea what he is getting himself into. Some people learn the hard way that protecting you comes with consequences. Give my regards to David. I hope his new school is working out well for him." Mary felt the blood drain from her face. Marcus knew where David went to school. He was making it clear that his threat extended beyond her to include her son. The message was unmistakable. If she continued to interfere with his business, if she continued to accept James's protection, David would pay the price. Mary sank onto her bed, trembling with fear and fury. Just when she had begun to hope that her life could be different, Marcus was reminding her that escape was not possible, that he would always have the power to hurt her through the people she loved. She thought about calling James, but what could she tell him? That Marcus was threatening her son, that accepting the job offer had made David a target, that her presence in James's life was bringing danger to everyone she cared about. Mary looked around her modest bedroom, at the life she had built through years of sacrifice and determination, and felt it all slipping away. Marcus had found her weakness, the one thing that mattered more to her than her own safety or happiness. He had threatened David, and that changed everything. Maybe James was right, that she deserved better than cleaning offices and struggling to make ends meet. Maybe he was right that she was capable of more than she had believed. But none of that mattered if accepting his help put her son in danger. Mary lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how to protect the people she loved without losing the hope that had just been offered to her. By dawn, she had reached a conclusion that broke her heart, but seemed like the only rational choice. She would have to give up the job. She would have to distance herself from James before Marcus escalated his threats. She would have to go back to being invisible, to accepting that her life would never be more than survival. The alternative, risking David's safety for her own happiness, was unthinkable. Marcus knew exactly how to control her, and he was making it clear that he would use that knowledge without hesitation. As Mary got ready for what might be her last day at Vance Corporation, she felt something inside her harden into resolve. Marcus thought he could control her through fear, thought he could manipulate her into giving up the best thing that had happened to her in years. He was probably right. But Mary was determined that this time he would at least know it had cost him something. This time she would not go quietly. James arrived at the office that morning with an energy he had not felt in months, looking forward to seeing Mary settle into her new role, to watching her discover what she was truly capable of when given the opportunity. His optimism lasted exactly as long as it took him to see her face. Mary was sitting at her new desk, staring at her computer screen with the hollow expression of someone who had received devastating news. She looked up when he approached, and James felt his heart sink at the defeat in her eyes. "Mary," he said quietly, "what happened?" Mary glanced around the open office area, noting the curious glances from other employees who were clearly interested in any drama involving the boss and his mysterious new assistant. "Could we speak privately?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. James nodded and led her into his office, closing the door behind them. The moment they were alone, Mary's composure cracked slightly, and James saw the fear she was trying so hard to hide. "He called me last night," she said without preamble. "Marcus, he knows about the job, and he is not happy about it." James felt cold fury wash over him. What exactly did he say? Mary recited the message word for word, watching James's expression grow darker with each detail. When she finished, the silence in the office was thick with tension. "He threatened David," James said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He did not say he would hurt David," Mary corrected quickly. "He just made it clear that he knows where my son goes to school, that he is watching us." The implication was obvious. James began pacing behind his desk, his mind racing through possibilities and responses. "Mary, you cannot let him intimidate you into giving up this opportunity." "I cannot let him hurt my son," Mary replied firmly. "James, I appreciate everything you have done for me, but I think it would be better if I went back to my old position. Or better yet, if I found work somewhere else entirely. Somewhere Marcus cannot connect me to you." James stopped pacing and turned to face her, seeing the way she held herself, straight and strong despite the fear, prepared to sacrifice her own happiness to protect her child. The sight made his chest ache with admiration and protective fury in equal measure. "Mary, running away will not solve this problem. Marcus will still know where you live, where David goes to school. Distance will not make you safer. It will just make you more isolated." "But it will make you safer," Mary said quietly. "As long as I'm here, as long as you are protecting me, Marcus will see you as a target. I will not be responsible for bringing that kind of trouble into your life." James moved around his desk, closing the distance between them. "Mary, look at me." She raised her eyes reluctantly, and James saw the tears she was fighting not to shed. "I am not afraid of Marcus Thorne," James said firmly. "I am not going to let him threaten you or David or anyone else I care about, and I am certainly not going to let him drive you away just when your life is finally moving in the right direction." "You do not understand," Mary said desperately. "Marcus does not make idle threats. When he wants to hurt someone, he finds a way to do it. I cannot risk David's safety, not even for this job." James felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest as he looked at this woman who was prepared to sacrifice everything for her child's welfare. "Then we make sure David is safe," Mary frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean we do not let Marcus have the power to threaten him," James said, his mind already forming a plan. "Mary, what school does David attend?" "Lincoln Middle School." "But James, you cannot." "Lincoln Middle School has an excellent private security program for at-risk students," James interrupted. "Children of executives, children who have received threats, children whose safety is a concern for any reason. The program provides discreet protection during school hours and secure transportation if needed." Mary stared at him. "That sounds expensive." "It is. But Vance Corporation has a scholarship program for the children of employees who need additional security. David would qualify immediately." Mary felt her heart race as she processed what James was offering. "You would do that? Pay for private security for my son?" "Mary," James said softly, "I would do anything necessary to keep both of you safe. Anything necessary to make sure Marcus cannot use fear to control your choices." Mary looked into his eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch. Not just determination or even protectiveness, but something deeper. Something that looked like love, though neither of them was ready to voice that possibility. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you go so far for someone like me?" James moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, close enough to catch the scent of her shampoo. "Because someone like you, someone brave and honest and strong, deserves to have someone fight for her. Because David deserves to have his mother's choices protected from predators like Marcus. Because I care about you more than I have ever cared about anyone in my life." The last words hung in the air between them. A confession that neither of them had intended, but both of them felt. Mary looked up into James's face and saw her own feelings reflected there, the fear, the hope, the growing certainty that what was happening between them was more than friendship or professional relationship. "James," she said softly, "I am scared." "Of Marcus?" James asked. "Of this," Mary replied, gesturing between them, "of caring about you as much as I do, of letting myself believe that someone like you could really care about someone like me." James reached up and touched her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "Mary, I am not someone who plays games or makes promises I cannot keep. When I tell you that I care about you, I mean it. When I tell you that I will protect you and David, I mean it. When I tell you that you are worth fighting for, I mean every word." Mary felt tears spill over at the sincerity in his voice, at the way he looked at her like she was precious rather than ordinary. "What if Marcus finds a way to hurt you? What if protecting me costs you everything you have worked for?" "Then it costs me everything," James said simply. "Mary, I have spent 3 years building this company, accumulating wealth and success and all the things I thought mattered. But none of it means anything if I am too cowardly to protect the people I care about." Mary stared at him, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering, not just protection or financial security, but the kind of partnership she had never believed was possible. Someone who would stand beside her against any threat, who would put her welfare ahead of his own interests. "I do not know how to accept help," she admitted. "I have been taking care of myself and David for so long that I do not know how to let someone else share that responsibility." "Then learn," James said gently. "Let me teach you what it feels like to have someone in your corner. Let me show you that accepting help is not the same as being weak." Mary looked into his eyes and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "All right," she whispered. "All right, I will try." James felt relief flood through him so powerfully that he had to resist the urge to pull her into his arms. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently and stepped back to a professional distance. "The first thing we do is get David enrolled in the security program," he said, his voice businesslike despite the emotion in his eyes. "The second thing we do is make sure Marcus understands that threatening you or your son will have serious consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Mary asked. James smiled, and Mary saw something in that expression that reminded her why he had been successful enough to build a corporation from scratch. The kind that make him wish he had never heard of either of us. Mary felt a flutter of hope in her chest, the first she had experienced since hearing Marcus's voice on her phone. Maybe she did not have to choose between her son's safety and her own happiness. Maybe as with James beside her, she could have both. "James," she said softly, "thank you for believing in me, for protecting us, for making me believe that my life could be different." James looked at her standing there, brave and beautiful and trusting him with her future, and felt his heart swell with an emotion he had never experienced before. This was what love felt like, he realized. Not just attraction or affection, but the bone-deep certainty that he would do anything to keep this woman safe and happy. "Mary," he said quietly, "protecting you is not a burden. It is a privilege. And I promise you that Marcus Thorne will learn that threatening the people I care about is the biggest mistake he has ever made." James wasted no time implementing David's security arrangements. By noon that same day, he had spoken personally with the headmaster of Lincoln Middle School, arranged for discreet protection during school hours, and set up secure transportation to and from Mary's apartment. The efficiency with which he handled David's safety both impressed and overwhelmed Mary, who was still adjusting to the reality of having someone else shoulder responsibilities she had carried alone for so long. "The security team will be completely invisible," James explained as they reviewed the arrangements in his office. "David will not even know they are there unless there is a problem. And they have been briefed on Marcus specifically, his appearance, his methods, his history of using intimidation tactics." Mary nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. "James, this must be costing a fortune. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You will repay me by letting yourself succeed in this position," James replied firmly, "by proving to yourself that you deserve every opportunity I am giving you. By stopping Marcus from controlling your choices through fear." Mary looked across his desk at this man who had turned her world upside down in the span of a week, who was spending thousands of dollars to protect her son without asking for anything in return. "I still do not understand why you are doing all this." James met her eyes steadily. "Because someone has to stand up to men like Marcus. Because David deserves to feel safe at school. Because you deserve to make choices based on what you want rather than what you fear." The simple honesty in his voice made Mary's chest tighten with emotion she was still afraid to name. "And what do you want, James?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to address directly. James looked at Mary sitting across from him. Intelligent, brave, beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance, and felt the careful professional boundaries he had maintained beginning to dissolve. "I want you to be safe," he said quietly. "I want David to be safe. I want Marcus to learn that there are consequences for the way he treats people. And I want you to have the chance to discover what your life can be when you are not constantly looking over your shoulder." Mary felt her heart race at the intensity in his voice, at the way he was looking at her like she was the most important thing in his world. "James, I need you to know that whatever happens with Marcus, whatever this costs you, I will never forget what you have done for us." "Mary," James said softly, "this is not about gratitude. This is about doing what is right, and what is right is making sure you and David are protected while you build the life you deserve." Before Mary could respond, James's assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Vance, there is someone here to see you. He says his name is Marcus Thorne and that you are expecting him." James and Mary exchanged a look of surprise and alarm. Marcus was here, in the building, despite being explicitly banned from the premises. "How did he get past security?" James asked, rising from his chair. "He said he had new information about a potential legal matter involving the company," the assistant replied. "Security called me to verify whether you wanted to see him." James felt cold fury wash over him. Marcus was using implied legal threats to circumvent security, counting on corporate paranoia about lawsuits to gain access to the building. It was exactly the kind of manipulative tactic James should have expected. "Mary," James said quietly, "I want you to go to the break room and stay there until I handle this." "No," Mary said, standing as well. "If Marcus is here, it is because of me. I'm not going to hide while you face him alone." James wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she stay away from the man who had already caused her so much pain. But looking at Mary's determined expression, he realized that asking her to hide would be just another way of letting Marcus control her choices. "All right," he said. "But if things get heated, if he becomes threatening in any way, you leave immediately. Agreed?" Mary nodded, though they both knew she was unlikely to abandon James if the situation became dangerous. "Send Mr. Thorne in," James told his assistant, "and call security to have them standing by." Marcus entered the office with his usual confident swagger, but James noticed the tension around his eyes, the slight tightness in his smile that suggested he was not as composed as he wanted to appear. "James," Marcus said smoothly, extending his hand as if they were old friends. "Thank you for seeing me. I know our last meeting ended on an unfortunate note." James did not take the offered hand. "You have exactly 5 minutes to say whatever you came here to say before security escorts you out again." Marcus's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. I think you might want to reconsider that timeline once you hear what I have to say." "I doubt that very much," James replied coldly. Marcus's gaze shifted to Mary, who was standing beside James's desk with her arms crossed and her expression carefully neutral. "Hello, Mary. You look well. Corporate life seems to suit you." "What do you want, Marcus?" Mary asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "I want to help you both avoid a very embarrassing situation," Marcus said, settling into a chair without being invited. "You see, I have been doing some research into Vance Corporation's business practices, and I have discovered some very interesting information." James felt his warning instincts activate. "What kind of information?" Marcus opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder thick with documents. "Financial irregularities, questionable tax strategies, vendor relationships that might not look entirely legitimate under close scrutiny. The kind of information that could be very damaging if it fell into the wrong hands." "Are you threatening me?" James asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I am offering you a business proposition," Marcus corrected smoothly. "You have something I want. The partnership deal we discussed. I have something you want. My silence about these irregularities seems like a mutually beneficial arrangement." Mary felt her blood turn to ice as she realized what Marcus was doing. He was trying to blackmail James, using fabricated or distorted information to force him into the partnership he had already rejected. It was exactly the kind of manipulative tactic she should have expected. "Let me see those documents," James said, extending his hand. Marcus smiled and handed over the folder. "I think you will find them quite compelling." James flipped through the papers quickly, his expression growing darker with each page. Mary watched his face, noting the way his jaw tightened as he absorbed whatever Marcus had compiled. "These are financial records from 3 years ago," James said finally. "Transactions that were fully audited and approved by both our accounting firm and the IRS. Yes, but taken out of context, they could certainly appear questionable," Marcus replied. "And the media does so love a good corporate scandal story. Imagine how damaging it would be if these documents were leaked to investigative journalists with just the right spin." James felt a cold fury building in his chest. Marcus was not just threatening him, he was threatening his employees, his company, everyone who depended on Vance Corporation for their livelihood. "You are talking about extortion," James said quietly. "I am talking about business," Marcus corrected. "You give me what I want, and I make sure these documents never see the light of day. You refuse, and I cannot guarantee what might happen to them." Mary watched this exchange with growing horror, realizing that Marcus was essentially holding James's entire company hostage to force him into a partnership that would ultimately destroy it. The same pattern he had used with her, manipulation disguised as mutual benefit, threats disguised as business propositions. "James," Mary said quietly, "do not do it. Whatever he is threatening, do not give him what he wants." Marcus laughed. "Still the naive little girl, I see. Mary, you have no idea what you are talking about. This is business, not some romantic fantasy where good always triumphs over evil." "I know exactly what this is," Mary replied, her voice growing stronger. "This is you trying to destroy another good person because you cannot stand the thought that someone saw through your lies." Marcus's facade finally cracked, revealing the cold anger underneath. "You destroyed a perfectly good business opportunity, Mary. You cost me a significant amount of money with your interference. Did you really think there would not be consequences?" "The only consequences here are going to be yours," James said, standing to his full height. "You just confessed to attempted extortion in front of a witness. That is a felony, Marcus." Marcus's confident expression wavered for the first time. "You have no proof of anything." James smiled coldly and pressed a button on his desk phone. Actually, I do. This entire conversation has been recorded. Standard security protocol for all meetings in this office. The color drained from Marcus's face as the implications sank in. You cannot, that is illegal without consent. Not in this state, James replied calmly. Single-party consent laws mean I can record any conversation I am a party to, and threatening extortion is exactly the kind of conversation I make sure to document thoroughly. Marcus shot to his feet, his composure completely shattered. You think you are so smart, do you not? You think you can protect her from everything. You have no idea what you are dealing with. I know exactly what I am dealing with, James said, moving closer to Marcus. I am dealing with a coward who preys on vulnerable people and runs when someone fights back. I'm dealing with a criminal who thinks threats and intimidation make him powerful. I am dealing with a man who is about to learn that his actions have consequences. Marcus grabbed his briefcase, his hands shaking with rage. This is not over. You think you can humiliate me and just walk away? You think you can turn my own wife against me and face no repercussions? Ex-wife, Mary corrected firmly, and I turned against you the moment I realized what kind of man you really were. Marcus turned on her with a fury that made James step protectively closer. You were nothing when I found you, Mary. Nothing. A pathetic little bookkeeper with no prospects and no future. I gave you everything you had, and this is how you repay me. You gave me debt, Mary replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You gave me betrayal. You gave me years of struggling to clean up the mess you left behind, but you also gave me something else. You taught me to recognize predators. You taught me that some people cannot be trusted, no matter how charming they seem. And you taught me that some people are stronger than the worst things that happen to them, James added, his voice carrying a note of pride that made Mary's chest tighten with emotion. You taught me that integrity matters more than profit, that protecting the people you care about is worth any risk. Marcus looked between them, seeing something in their interaction that made his expression twist with disgust. I see. This is not just about business, is it? You actually think you love her, do not you, Vance? You think this pathetic little cleaning lady is worth risking everything for? James felt something snap inside his chest at the contempt in Marcus's voice, at the way he spoke about Mary like she was worthless. Mary is worth more than a dozen men like you. She has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire body. And yes, I love her. I love everything about her. Her strength, her courage, her dedication to her son, her refusal to let you break her spirit despite everything you put her through. The words hung in the air like a declaration and a challenge. Mary felt her breath catch as she processed what James had just said, the public confession of feelings they had been dancing around for weeks. Marcus laughed bitterly. How touching! The corporate prince falls for the cleaning lady. Very romantic. Very naive and very stupid. Do you have any idea what this is going to cost you when the press gets hold of it? The press? James asked, though he suspected he already knew what Marcus was threatening. Oh yes, Marcus said, his confidence returning as he played his final card. I have friends in journalism, people who would be very interested in a story about corporate executives who abuse their power to seduce vulnerable employees. People who would love to explore the timeline of your relationship with Mary, the circumstances under which she was promoted, the appearance of impropriety in your hiring practices. Mary felt her heart sink as she realized what Marcus was threatening. Even if his accusations were completely false, the story alone could destroy James's reputation and career. Corporate executives had been ruined by less scandalous headlines. You are going to destroy my reputation. Over a business deal I declined, James asked. I'm going to make sure you understand that there are consequences for humiliating me. Marcus replied coldly. "For both of you. Mary thought she could interfere with my business and hide behind your protection. You thought you could reject my partnership and face no repercussions. You were both wrong." James looked at Marcus standing there, small and petty and vicious in his wounded pride, and felt something crystallize in his chest, a certainty that had nothing to do with business strategy or risk management. "Do it," James said quietly. Marcus blinked in surprise. "What?" "Call your journalist friends," James continued, his voice growing stronger. "Tell them whatever story you want to tell. Make whatever accusations you think will hurt me. Because I am not going to let you use fear of public exposure to control my choices any more than I let you use financial threats." Mary stared at James in shock. "James, you cannot. Your reputation, your company will survive," James said firmly, turning to look at her. "Mary, I meant what I said. I love you. I love you enough to face whatever consequences that brings. I love you enough to tell the world that choosing you was the best decision I have ever made." Mary felt tears threaten as she looked into James's face, seeing the absolute certainty there, the willingness to risk everything for her. "But if Marcus spreads lies about us, about how we met, about why you hired me, then we tell the truth," James said simply. "We tell the truth about who you are, what you have accomplished, why you deserve every opportunity I have given you. We tell the truth about Marcus and his history of financial fraud and manipulation. We let people judge for themselves which story is more credible." Marcus's confident expression began to waver as he realized that his threats were not having the intended effect. "You are bluffing. No one risks their entire career for a woman like her." "You are right," James said, moving to stand beside Mary. "No one risks their career for a woman like Mary. They risk it for a woman they love. They risk it for a woman who is worth more than any career, any amount of money, any public reputation." James took Mary's hand, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers, the way she looked at him with a mixture of love and terror. "Mary," he said softly, "I should have said this sooner, should have found the courage to tell you before Marcus forced my hand, but I love you. I love your strength, your integrity, your dedication to David. I love the way you see the best in people, the way you never gave up despite everything you went through. I love you enough to face whatever Marcus throws at us, together." Mary felt her heart swell with an emotion so powerful it was almost overwhelming. "James, I love you too, but I cannot let you destroy everything you have worked for just to protect me." "You are not destroying anything," James said firmly. "You are giving me something worth protecting it for. Mary, I have spent 3 years building a company, accumulating success, achieving everything I thought I wanted, but none of it meant anything until I found someone I wanted to share it with." Marcus watched this exchange with growing fury, realizing that his final threat had not just failed, but had actually strengthened their resolve. "You are both fools. Do you think love is going to pay your bills when your company collapses? Do you think integrity is going to matter when no one will do business with you?" "I think," James said quietly, "that a man who has never experienced real love would not understand what someone would sacrifice for it. And I think a man who has built his entire life on lies and manipulation would not understand what real integrity looks like." James turned to face Marcus fully, his expression cold and determined. "But you are about to learn. Because I am not just going to defend myself against your accusations, I am going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. Every business partner you have defrauded, every person you have manipulated, every lie you have told to advance your career. By the time I am finished, the only person whose reputation is destroyed will be you." Marcus grabbed his briefcase, his facade of control completely shattered. "We will see about that, Vance. We will see who comes out ahead when this is all over. Yes, James replied calmly, we will. After Marcus stormed out of the office, James and Mary stood alone in the sudden silence, still holding hands, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. James, Mary said softly, did you mean what you said about loving me? James turned to face her fully, seeing the hope and fear warring in her expression. I meant every word. Mary, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Mary looked up into his face, seeing the sincerity there, the absolute conviction. I love you too, she whispered. I have been falling in love with you for months. But I was too afraid to believe someone like you could ever care about someone like me. James cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Mary, you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. Loving you is not something I settled for. It is the greatest privilege of my life. Mary felt tears spill over at the tenderness in his voice, at the way he looked at her like she was precious and valuable and worth fighting for. What happens now? She asked. James smiled, and Mary saw something in that expression that made her heart race with hope instead of fear. Now we face whatever Marcus throws at us, together. Now we build something real and lasting, based on truth instead of lies. Now we prove that love and integrity are stronger than manipulation and fear. Mary stood on her tiptoes and kissed him softly, a gentle press of lips that tasted like hope and promise and the beginning of forever. Together, she agreed against his mouth. Whatever comes next, we face it together. The attack came sooner than James had expected. Within 48 hours of their confrontation, Marcus had made good on his threat to involve the media. The story broke on a prominent business blog known for investigative journalism, with a headline that made James's stomach clench. Vance Corporation CEO under fire for alleged workplace impropriety. James read the article in his office while Mary sat across from his desk, her face pale but determined. The piece was a masterwork of insinuation disguised as journalism, carefully avoiding direct accusations while painting a picture of impropriety that would be difficult to refute without seeming defensive. According to the anonymous sources quoted in the article, James had used his position to pursue a romantic relationship with a vulnerable employee, promoting her far beyond her qualifications in exchange for personal favors. The story mentioned Mary's background as a night janitor, her lack of college education, and the suspicious speed of her promotion to an executive-level position. It questioned whether Vance Corporation's hiring practices met appropriate ethical standards and suggested that shareholders might want to examine the company's internal policies more closely. It is very carefully written, James observed, setting the tablet aside. Everything is presented as questions rather than accusations, anonymous sources rather than named accusers. Marcus learned something from his previous legal troubles. Mary felt sick as she processed the implications. James, this makes you look like you were taking advantage of me, like you used your power to coerce me into a relationship. Anyone who knows you would realize how ridiculous that accusation is, James replied firmly. You are the strongest person I know, Mary. The idea that you could be coerced into anything is absurd. But people reading this article do not know me, Mary pointed out. They are going to see exactly what Marcus wants them to see, a powerful CEO who abused his position to pursue a vulnerable employee. James stood and moved around his desk, taking Mary's hands in his. Mary, look at me. Do you regret any of the choices we have made? Do you regret taking this job, standing up to Marcus, letting yourself care about me? Mary looked into his eyes and felt her fears quiet slightly. No, I do not regret any of it. But James, This could destroy your career. Your company could lose clients. Investors could withdraw their support. I cannot live with being the reason you lose everything you have worked for." "You are not the reason," James said firmly. "Marcus is the reason. Marcus and his inability to accept that his actions have consequences. Mary, if I give in to this pressure, if I let fear of bad publicity control my choices, then he wins. Then every person he has ever manipulated and intimidated was right to stay silent." Mary felt tears threaten as she processed the magnitude of what James was offering to sacrifice for her. But what if the cost is too high? What if standing up to him destroys everything good you have built? James cupped her face gently, seeing the love and fear warring in her expression. "Mary, what I have built with you is worth more than anything I built before you. This company, this success, none of it means anything if I am too cowardly to protect the people I love." Before Mary could respond, James's assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Vance, the board of directors is requesting an emergency meeting. They want to discuss the media coverage and its potential impact on company operations." James felt his stomach tighten. He had expected this, but facing his board while they were in crisis mode would not be pleasant. These were people who had trusted him with their investments, who depended on Vance Corporation's reputation for their own financial security. "Schedule it for this afternoon," James replied. "And Margaret, I want you to prepare a complete file on Marcus Thorne. Business history, legal troubles, everything we have discovered about his methods and background. The board is going to need context for what we are dealing with." After his assistant left, James turned back to Mary, seeing the guilt and worry etched on her face. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "If I had never told you about Marcus, if I had just kept working nights and stayed out of his way, if you had done that, he would have destroyed my company anyway," James interrupted. "Mary, you saved me from making the biggest business mistake of my life. You warned me about a predator who would have taken everything I had worked for. The fact that he's now trying to hurt us both just proves how dangerous he really is." Mary looked up at him, seeing the absolute conviction in his expression. "Do you really believe that?" "I know that," James said firmly. "Mary, you are not the problem here. You are the solution. You are the person with enough integrity to speak up when you saw someone in danger. You are the person brave enough to face the man who destroyed your life in order to protect mine." James pulled her closer, feeling the slight tremor in her hands. "And you are the person I love enough to fight the entire world for, if that is what it takes." Mary felt her heart swell with an emotion so powerful it was almost overwhelming. "James, I love you too, more than I ever thought possible. But I am terrified that loving me is going to cost you everything. The only thing that would cost me everything," James said softly, "would be losing you. Mary, we can rebuild a business, recover from bad publicity, overcome financial setbacks, but I could not recover from walking away from the best thing that has ever happened to me." Mary stood on her tiptoes and kissed him deeply, pouring all of her love and fear and gratitude into the connection between them. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "What do we do now?" she asked. James smiled, and Mary saw something in that expression that reminded her why he had been successful enough to build a corporation from scratch. "Now we fight back. We tell our story, the real story, and we let people judge for themselves which version is more credible." "How do we do that?" "We call a press conference," James said with growing conviction. "We present the facts about Marcus's history, the truth about our relationship, and the reality of your qualifications and character. We stop letting him control the narrative." Mary felt a flutter of fear at the thought of facing reporters, of having her private life dissected by strangers. "James, I do not know if I can handle that kind of scrutiny." "You do not have to handle it alone," James said firmly. "We face it together. just like we have faced everything else. Mary, you are one of the strongest people I know. You have survived things that would have broken most people. You can certainly handle a few reporters." Mary looked into his eyes and saw the confidence he had in her, the absolute belief that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. "All right," she said quietly. "If you think it will help, if you think it is the right thing to do, then I will do it." James felt his chest swell with pride and love as he looked at this extraordinary woman who was willing to face public scrutiny to help clear his name. "Mary, you continue to amaze me with your courage." "I am not courageous," Mary said. "I am terrified." "Being courageous does not mean you are not terrified," James replied gently. "It means you do the right thing despite being terrified. And facing Marcus's lies with the truth is definitely the right thing." That afternoon, James faced his board of directors in the conference room, where he had first encountered Marcus's false promises. The atmosphere was tense, with several board members clearly concerned about the potential impact of negative publicity on company operations. "James," said Robert Chen, the board chairman, "we need to understand the full scope of this situation. The allegations in this article are serious, and our legal counsel is advising us to consider all options for protecting the company's reputation." James nodded, understanding their concerns while feeling frustrated by their willingness to assume the worst. "I appreciate your concerns, Robert. But before we discuss options, I think you need to understand exactly what we are dealing with." James opened the file Margaret had prepared and began laying out Marcus's history. The failed partnerships, the pattern of financial fraud, the legal settlements designed to silence his victims. As he spoke, he watched the board members' expressions shift from concern about his behavior to anger about Marcus's. "So this man approached us with a fraudulent business proposal," said Patricia Williams, the board's financial expert. "And when you rejected it, he decided to retaliate by attacking your personal life." "That is exactly what happened," James confirmed. "Marcus Thorne is a predator who uses charm and false promises to gain access to successful companies, then manipulates and intimidates his victims into silence when his schemes fail." "And Mrs. Parker," began another board member. "Miss Parker," James corrected firmly. "Mary is Marcus's ex-wife and his first victim. She warned me about his true nature, which is why I was able to investigate his background and reject his proposal before he could damage our company." Robert leaned forward, studying James's expression. "James, we need to ask this directly. What is the nature of your relationship with Miss Parker?" James felt his heart pound as he realized this was the moment of truth. He could downplay his feelings, present their relationship as purely professional, try to minimize the personal stakes, or he could tell the truth and trust his board to make the right decision. "I am in love with her," James said simply. "I have promoted her because she is intelligent, capable, and trustworthy. I have protected her because she deserves protection from a man who has already destroyed her life once. And I have refused to let Marcus's threats control my choices because some things are more important than avoiding controversy." The silence in the conference room was thick with tension as the board members processed his confession. James waited, knowing that their decision would determine not just his future with the company, but his ability to protect Mary from Marcus's continued attacks. "James," Patricia said finally, "in your professional opinion, is Miss Parker qualified for the position you have given her?" "She is not just qualified," James replied. "She is exceptional. In 4 years of observing her work, I have never seen her take a shortcut, never seen her treat any responsibility as beneath her attention, never seen her do anything that was not completely ethical and professional. And, in your personal opinion," Robert added quietly, "is she worth the risk this controversy poses to the company?" James looked around the table at these people who had trusted him with their investments, who had supported his leadership for 3 years. Mary Parker is worth any risk. She is worth fighting for, worth standing up to bullies like Marcus, worth defending regardless of the cost. If protecting her means this company faces some negative publicity, then that is a price I am willing to pay. The board members exchanged glances, and James saw the decision forming in their expressions before anyone spoke. "Then we fight back," Robert said firmly. "We expose Marcus Thorne for what he is. We defend your relationship with Miss Parker, and we make it clear that Vance Corporation does not bow to extortion or intimidation." James felt relief flood through him so powerfully that he had to grip the edge of the table. "Are you certain this could get ugly before it gets better?" Patricia smiled grimly. "James, we did not build this company by avoiding difficult fights. And if Marcus Thorne thinks he can manipulate our CEO and attack our employees without consequences, he's about to learn otherwise." "What do you recommend?" James asked. "We tell the truth," Robert said simply. "All of it. Marcus's history, your relationship with Miss Parker, the timeline of events that led to this situation. We present the facts and let the public decide which story is more credible." James nodded, feeling his board's support strengthen his resolve. "I want to call a press conference tomorrow morning. I want to address these allegations directly and publicly." "Are you sure Miss Parker is prepared for that level of scrutiny?" Patricia asked gently. James thought about Mary's courage in facing Marcus, her willingness to risk everything to warn him about a danger she had no obligation to reveal. Mary Parker is prepared for anything. She is the strongest person I know. "Then we stand behind both of you," Robert said firmly. "Whatever Marcus Thorne throws at us next, we face it together." As James left the board meeting, he felt a certainty he had not experienced since this crisis began. Tomorrow, he would tell the world the truth about Marcus, about Mary, about the love that was worth fighting for regardless of the cost. Tomorrow, he would prove that integrity and courage were stronger than manipulation and fear. Tomorrow, he would show Marcus Thorne what real consequences looked like. The press conference was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning in the main conference room of Vance Corporation. James had spent most of the previous evening with Mary, helping her prepare for the questions they were likely to face, but more importantly, reminding her that she had nothing to be ashamed of and everything to be proud of. "Remember," James said as they reviewed their talking points one final time, "you are not a victim in this story, you are a hero. You are the person who saved my company from a con artist, who had the courage to speak up when you saw someone in danger." Mary nodded, though she still felt nervous about facing a room full of reporters. "What if they ask about our relationship, about how it started, when we knew we had feelings for each other?" "Then we tell the truth," James said simply, "that we fell in love gradually, naturally, over months of late-night conversations and mutual respect. That our relationship has been built on honesty and shared values, not workplace manipulation." Mary took a deep breath, drawing strength from James's confidence in her. "I still cannot believe you are risking everything for me." James took her hands, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers. "Mary, I am not risking everything for you. I am fighting for everything that matters. You, David, the future we could build together. That is not a risk. That is the most important investment I have ever made." At 10 o'clock sharp, James walked into the packed conference room with Mary beside him. The room was filled with business reporters, financial journalists, and local media representatives, all eager for details about the scandal that had been dominating business news for the past 2 days. James approached the podium with the same confidence he brought to quarterly earnings calls, but Mary could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself when the stakes were highest. "Good morning," James began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "I called this press conference to address the allegations that have been made against me and against Vance Corporation, and to provide you with the facts about what has really been happening." James outlined Marcus's history methodically, presenting documented evidence of his pattern of financial fraud, his history of failed partnerships, and his use of legal settlements to silence his victims. He explained how Marcus had approached Vance Corporation with a fraudulent business proposal, how Mary had warned him about Marcus's true nature, and how Marcus had retaliated when his scheme failed. "Miss Parker," James continued, gesturing for Mary to join him at the podium, "is not a victim of workplace manipulation. She is the person whose integrity and courage saved my company from a potentially devastating fraud. She risked her own job security to warn me about a man who had already destroyed her life once, because she believed it was the right thing to do." Mary stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady as she began to speak. "My name is Mary Parker, and Marcus Thorne was my husband for 7 years. During that time, he convinced me to co-sign loans and credit applications for what he claimed were legitimate business investments. When our marriage ended, I discovered that I was responsible for over $70,000 in debt that Marcus had accumulated through these schemes." The room was completely silent as Mary continued her story, detailing the years of struggle to pay off debt that was not her responsibility, the multiple jobs she had worked to rebuild her life, and the difficult decision to warn James despite the personal cost. "I did not want to get involved," Mary said, her voice growing stronger. "I had built a stable life for myself and my son, and I was afraid of what Marcus might do if he discovered that I had interfered with his business, but I could not stand by and watch him destroy another good person's life the way he had destroyed mine." A reporter raised her hand. "Miss Parker, what is the nature of your relationship with Mr. Vance? When did it become romantic?" Mary felt her cheeks flush, but she met the reporter's gaze steadily. "James and I fell in love over the course of several months of working together and getting to know each other. Our relationship developed naturally, based on mutual respect and shared values. At no point did James use his position to pressure me into anything, romantic or otherwise." Another reporter jumped in. "Mr. Vance, critics are suggesting that you promoted Miss Parker far beyond her qualifications. How do you respond to that?" James stepped back to the microphone, his expression serious. "Mary Parker is one of the most qualified people I have ever hired for any position. She has demonstrated exceptional integrity, attention to detail, and professional competence over 4 years of employment with this company. Her background as a night janitor does not disqualify her from advancement any more than my background as the son of a construction worker disqualified me from running a corporation." "But Miss Parker lacks a college degree," another reporter pointed out. "How can you justify promoting her to an executive-level position?" "I can justify it," James replied firmly, "because competence and character matter more than credentials. Mary Parker has managed complex financial situations, raised a brilliant son as a single mother, and demonstrated the kind of ethical decision-making that is essential for any leadership role. Her lack of a college degree is irrelevant compared to her proven track record of excellence." Mary felt her chest swell with emotion as she listened to James defend her qualifications, her worth, her right to advancement based on merit rather than background. No one had ever spoken about her achievements with such conviction, such pride. "Miss Parker," a third reporter called out, "what do you say to critics who suggest that your relationship with Mr. Vance creates a conflict of interest?" Mary looked out at the room full of reporters, feeling James's supportive presence beside her, and found her voice. "I say that loving someone and working with them only creates a conflict of interest if you compromise your professional standards. James has never asked me to do anything unethical, and I have never used our relationship to avoid responsibility or seek unfair advantage. If anything, our personal connection makes me more committed to maintaining the highest professional standards. Mr. Vance, another reporter asked, what do you say to shareholders who might be concerned about the potential impact of this controversy on company operations? James looked directly into the camera that was broadcasting the press conference live. I say that Vance Corporation has always operated according to the highest ethical standards, and that will not change. Our commitment to integrity in business practices and employee treatment is not negotiable, regardless of external pressure or negative publicity. James paused, then continued with growing conviction. I also want to be completely clear about something. Mary Parker is not just my employee. She is the woman I love. She is the person whose courage saved my company from fraud, whose integrity has made me a better leader, whose presence in my life has reminded me what really matters. Any attempt to force me to choose between my personal happiness and my professional responsibilities will fail, because I refuse to accept that loving someone of exceptional character could ever be wrong. The room erupted in questions, but James raised his hand for silence. I have one more thing to say. Marcus Thorne is a predator who has spent years manipulating and defrauding honest people. His attack on Mary and me is not about justice or ethical business practices. It is about revenge for being exposed and stopped. I will not allow him to use lies and intimidation to destroy innocent people, and I will use every legal resource at my disposal to make sure he faces appropriate consequences for his actions. James stepped back from the podium, taking Mary's hand in a gesture that was both protective and defiant. Thank you for your time. We will not be taking any further questions today. As they walked out of the conference room together, Mary felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had told their story, presented the facts, and made their case to the public. Now they would have to wait to see whether truth and integrity were enough to overcome Marcus's campaign of lies and manipulation. How do you think it went? Mary asked as they reached the safety of James's office. James pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I think you were magnificent. I think we told the truth with dignity and conviction. And I think Marcus Thorne just discovered that attacking us was the biggest mistake of his life. Mary rested her head against James's chest, feeling his steady heartbeat, drawing strength from his unwavering confidence. What happens now? Now we wait, James said softly. We let the public absorb what we have told them, and we see whether people are more interested in scandal or truth. Mary looked up into his face, seeing the love and determination there. James, whatever happens, I want you to know that I have never been more proud to stand beside anyone in my life. James cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Mary, you have given me something worth fighting for. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, loving you will always be the best decision I have ever made. They stood there in the quiet of his office, holding each other, knowing that they had crossed a line from which there was no return. They had chosen love over safety, truth over convenience, integrity over reputation. Now they would discover whether those choices were enough to overcome the forces aligned against them. But whatever came next, they would face it together, and somehow that made everything else seem possible. The response to the press conference was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the story had been picked up by major news networks, business publications, and social media platforms. But to James and Mary's surprise, the narrative that emerged was not the one Marcus had tried to create. Vance Corporation CEO exposes business fraud in dramatic press conference, read the headline in the Wall Street Journal. Corporate executive defends employee who saved company from con artist, announced CNN Business. Social media was flooded with comments supporting James and Mary's courage in standing up to Marcus's intimidation tactics. "I cannot believe this," Mary said, scrolling through news coverage on her computer. "People are actually supporting us." James looked over her shoulder, reading the comments from viewers who had watched their press conference. Many were praising Mary's bravery in speaking out about Marcus's fraud. Others were impressed by James's willingness to risk his reputation to protect an employee. A few business analysts were calling for investigation into Marcus's other partnerships and potential victims. "People recognize authenticity when they see it," James said, his arm around Mary's shoulders. "They can tell the difference between someone telling the truth and someone spreading lies for personal gain." Mary's phone rang, and she glanced at the caller ID with surprise. "It is David's school. I hope everything is all right." "Miss Parker," the voice belonged to David's principal, "I wanted to call and let you know that David is fine, but we have had some reporters asking questions about your family. Nothing inappropriate, just trying to get background information about the story. I wanted you to be aware." Mary felt her stomach clench. She had been so focused on defending herself and James that she had not fully considered how the media attention might affect David. Is he upset? Does he know what is happening? "He knows there has been some news coverage involving you and your employer," the principal replied. "And, Miss Parker, I want you to know that David handled the questions from his classmates with remarkable maturity. He told them that his mother was helping expose a bad person who had tried to hurt people, and that he was proud of her courage." Mary felt tears threaten at the image of her 12-year-old son defending her to his classmates. "Thank you for calling. I will talk to him tonight about everything that has been happening." After she hung up, James saw the worry in her expression. "Mary, what is wrong?" "David's school. There have been reporters asking questions, and David knows something is happening. I need to tell him the whole story, James. He deserves to know the truth about his father, about why we are in the news, about what this might mean for our future." James nodded, understanding the difficult position Mary was in. David was old enough to understand the basic facts, but young enough to be hurt by the knowledge that his father was a criminal who had tried to destroy his mother's happiness. "Do you want me to be there when you talk to him?" James offered. "I know this is between you and David, but if you think it would help to have support." Mary looked at him with gratitude, touched by his willingness to step into the complicated dynamics of her relationship with her son. "I think that would help. David likes you, and he might have questions about what this means for us, for all of us." That evening, Mary sat in her living room with David and James, trying to find the right words to explain a situation that was complicated even for adults to understand. "David," she began carefully, "you know that there has been some news coverage about Mr. Vance and me at work. I want to explain what has been happening and why it is important." David nodded seriously, his intelligent eyes focused on his mother's face. "Some kids at school said you were on TV. They said there was some kind of scandal." Mary took a deep breath. "David, do you remember how I told you that your father and I divorced because we had different ideas about what was important in life?" "Yeah. You said he cared more about money than about family." "That was true, but there was more to it than that." Mary struggled with how much detail to share. "Your father had business practices that were not honest. He would convince people to lend him money or sign contracts, and then he would not fulfill his promises. When we were married, I did not know about these practices, but I ended up responsible for debts he had accumulated through lying to people." David frowned, processing this information. "So Dad was stealing?" "Not exactly stealing," Mary said carefully, "but he was lying to people and taking advantage of their trust." When Mr. Vance's company was considering doing business with your father, I warned him about what kind of person your father really was. And now Dad is mad because you stopped him from lying to Mr. Vance?" David asked, his voice sharp with understanding. James leaned forward slightly. "David, your father is angry because his plan did not work. He tried to make your mother and me look bad by telling lies to reporters, but we decided to tell the truth instead." David looked between his mother and James, and Mary saw something in her son's expression that made her heart race. Not confusion or upset, but a kind of fierce pride. "Mom," David said seriously, "you did the right thing. If Dad was trying to hurt Mr. Vance the same way he hurt us, then you were right to stop him." Mary felt her chest swell with emotion at her son's mature understanding of the situation. "David, I want you to know that this might mean some changes for us. Some people might ask you questions about our family, about Mr. Vance and me. If anyone makes you uncomfortable or asks inappropriate questions, you tell them to talk to me or to your principal." David nodded, then looked at James with curiosity. "Mr. Vance, are you and my mom, do you like each other? Like, more than friends?" Mary felt her cheeks flush, but James answered with his characteristic directness. "Yes, David, I love your mother very much. And if she is willing, I would like to be part of your family." David considered this for a moment, then smiled. "That would be cool. Mom has been happier since she started working for you, and you seem like someone who would not lie to people or try to hurt them." Mary looked at her son, amazed by his wisdom and maturity. "David, are you okay with all of this? With the news coverage, with Mr. Vance and me, with the possibility that things might be different from now on?" David stood up and hugged his mother tightly. "Mom, you have been taking care of me by yourself for my whole life. You deserve to have someone take care of you too. And if that person is willing to stand up to Dad to protect us, then he must really love you." Mary felt tears spill over as she held her son, overwhelmed by his acceptance and support. "I love you so much, David. I love you too, Mom, and I am proud of you for being brave." After David went to his room to finish his homework, Mary and James sat together on her small couch, processing the magnitude of everything that had changed in their lives. "He took that better than I expected," Mary said, curled against James's side. "I was so worried about how he would react to learning the truth about Marcus, about us." "David is a remarkable kid," James replied, his arm tightening around her. "He gets that from his mother." Mary looked up at James, seeing the love and contentment in his expression. "James, what are we doing? A week ago, I was cleaning your office and you were a distant boss who was kind to me. Now we are declaring our love on national television and planning a future together." James smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We are proving that sometimes the best things in life happen when you least expect them. We are showing the world that real love is worth fighting for, regardless of the obstacles." Mary felt a peace settle over her that she had not experienced in years. "I never thought I would have this. A man who loved me enough to risk everything, a son who was proud of my choices, a future that was built on truth instead of lies." "You deserve all of this and more," James said softly. "Mary, you have given me a reason to be proud of more than just financial success. You have given me a family worth protecting, a love worth celebrating, a partnership that makes everything else possible." Mary kissed him gently, tasting hope and promise and the sweetness of dreams coming true. "So what happens next?" James pulled back to look at her face, seeing the trust and love there. "Next, we build the life we want together. We let Marcus face the consequences of his actions while we focus on our future. We prove that integrity and courage always win in the end." Mary smiled, feeling the last of her fears dissolve in the warmth of James's love. "Together." "Together," James confirmed, "always together." As they sat in the quiet of Mary's living room, holding each other, they both knew that the worst was behind them. Marcus's threats had failed, their love had survived public scrutiny, and they had emerged stronger than ever. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new adventures in building a life together. But tonight, they had everything they needed: love, truth, family, and the absolute certainty that they had chosen correctly when they chose each other. 6 months later, Mary stood in front of the mirror in what had once been the guest bedroom of James's penthouse apartment, adjusting the pearl necklace he had given her for her birthday. The apartment had become their home in all the ways that mattered, with David's artwork on the refrigerator and family photos on the mantel. But today felt different. Today felt like the beginning of forever. "Are you ready?" James asked from the doorway, looking handsome in his charcoal grey suit. "The car is here." Mary turned to face him, still amazed by the way he looked at her, like she was the most beautiful woman in the world, like she was everything he had ever wanted. "I am ready. But James, are you sure about this? About the foundation? About making this so public?" James crossed the room and took her hands, noting the slight tremor in her fingers that always appeared when she was nervous about public events. "Mary, this foundation was your idea. Using our experience to help other victims of financial fraud, providing resources for people who have been manipulated by predators like Marcus, this is important work." Mary nodded, though she still felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were launching. The Parker Vance Foundation for Financial Justice would provide legal assistance, counseling services, and financial education for people who had been victimized by fraud schemes. It was funded by Vance Corporation and several other businesses that had joined the effort after Marcus's crimes were fully exposed. "I just never imagined that something good could come from what Marcus put me through," Mary said softly. "It feels surreal that my worst experience is now helping other people." James cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone in the gesture that had become so familiar. "That is what makes you extraordinary, Mary. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and found a way to use it to help others. You turned your pain into purpose." Mary leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his unwavering confidence in her. "What about David? He's still nervous about being in the spotlight." "David is going to be fine," James assured her. "He has his mother's courage and his own brilliant mind. Besides, he understands that this foundation could help other kids whose families have been hurt by people like Marcus." Mary nodded, remembering the conversation they had had with David the week before. Her son, now 13 and even more thoughtful than ever, had surprised her by asking if he could speak at the Foundation's launch event about what it meant to see justice finally served. "Mrs. Parker Vance?" David's voice called from the living room, using the new name she had taken after their wedding 3 months earlier. "The car is waiting downstairs." Mary felt her heart flutter at hearing her married name, still not quite used to the reality that she was Mrs. James Vance, that the man who had once seemed completely out of reach was now her husband and partner in every sense. "Coming, sweetheart," she called back, then turned to James with a smile. "Ready to change the world, Mr. Vance." James offered her his arm with the formal gallantry that had charmed her from the beginning. "Ready to change the world with you, Mrs. Vance." The launch event was held in the ballroom of one of the city's finest hotels, with representatives from the media, business community, and legal profession in attendance. Mary had worried about facing reporters again, but the coverage of their story had remained largely positive, with Marcus's subsequent arrest and conviction for fraud helping to validate their version of events. As they walked into the ballroom together, Mary was amazed by the turnout. Business leaders who had initially been skeptical of their relationship were now supporters of their foundation. Journalists who had once questioned her qualifications were now documenting her transformation into an advocate for fraud victims. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Master of Ceremonies announced, "please welcome the founders of the Parker Vance Foundation for Financial Justice, Mr. and Mrs. James Vance." Mary felt her heart race as she and James approached the podium, but looking out at the crowd, she saw faces filled with support and respect, rather than skepticism or judgment. These people were here because they believed in what she and James were trying to accomplish. "Good evening," James began, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "Thank you all for joining us tonight as we launch an organization that is very close to our hearts. The Parker Vance Foundation exists because we have seen firsthand how financial predators operate, and we know that victims often have nowhere to turn for help." James gestured for Mary to join him at the microphone. "But this foundation is not really my vision. It is my wife's. Mary has taken her own experience as a victim of financial fraud and transformed it into a mission to help others. I could not be more proud to support her in this work." Mary stepped forward, feeling the familiar nervousness that came with public speaking, but also the growing confidence that James had helped her develop. "5 years ago, I was a single mother working 3 jobs to pay off debt that was not my responsibility. I felt ashamed, isolated, and powerless against a system that seemed designed to protect predators rather than victims." Mary's voice grew stronger as she continued. "But I learned something important during those years of struggle. I learned that shame belongs to the people who commit fraud, not to the people who are victimized by it. I learned that speaking up about financial abuse is not weakness, it is strength. And I learned that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can become the foundation for helping others." The audience was completely silent, absorbed in Mary's words and the conviction with which she spoke them. "This foundation will provide free legal assistance to fraud victims, financial counseling to help people rebuild their lives, and education programs to help people recognize and avoid financial predators. But most importantly, it will provide something I did not have for many years, the knowledge that you are not alone, that help is available, and that justice is possible." Mary paused, looking out at the crowd, then continued with growing emotion. "I also want to say something about the man standing beside me. James Vance could have chosen the easy path when he learned about my past. He could have distanced himself from controversy, protected his reputation, avoided the complications that come with loving someone who had been victimized by a criminal. Instead, he chose to stand up for what was right, regardless of the cost." Mary turned to look at James, seeing the love and pride in his expression. "James taught me that real strength is not just surviving difficult circumstances, it is using those experiences to make the world better for others. He taught me that love is not just feeling good about someone, it is being willing to fight for them when they cannot fight for themselves." The audience erupted in applause, and Mary felt tears threaten as she absorbed the support and validation from people who had once seen her as nothing more than a night janitor with poor judgment in men. After the formal presentations, Mary and James mingled with the guests, accepting congratulations and discussing the Foundation's programs. Mary was amazed by how many people approached her with their own stories of financial manipulation, their gratitude for her willingness to speak publicly about such a difficult topic. "Mrs. Vance," said a woman who appeared to be in her 60s, I wanted to thank you for your courage in exposing Marcus Thorne. My sister was one of his earlier victims, and she never had the strength to speak up. Seeing justice finally served has given her some peace." Mary felt her chest tighten with emotion. "I'm so sorry your sister went through that. Please let her know that the Foundation's counseling services are available to anyone who has been affected by financial fraud, regardless of how long ago it happened." As the evening progressed, Mary found herself in conversation with a young journalist who had covered their story from the beginning. "Mrs. Vance," the reporter said, "looking back on everything that has happened, do you have any regrets about how you handled the situation with Marcus Thorne?" Mary considered the question carefully. "I regret that it took me so long to find the courage to speak up. I regret that other people were victimized while I stayed silent. But I do not regret warning James about Marcus, and I certainly do not regret the life that decision made possible. What advice would you give to other women who might be in similar situations?" "I would tell them that shame and fear are the weapons predators use to keep their victims silent," Mary replied. "I would tell them that speaking up is not easy, but it is always worth it. And I would tell them that sometimes the people who seem out of reach, the people with power and resources, are the ones most willing to help if you just have the courage to ask." Later that evening, after the last guests had departed and they had returned home, Mary stood on the balcony of their apartment, looking out at the city lights below. James joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "How do you feel?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "About tonight, about the Foundation, about everything we have accomplished." Mary leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "I feel grateful that you saw something in me worth fighting for, grateful that David has grown up to be such an incredible young man despite everything, grateful that we found a way to turn something ugly into something beautiful." James tightened his arms around her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Mary, you know that none of this would have been possible without your courage, right? I did not save you. You saved yourself. You saved me. You saved everyone who will be helped by this foundation." Mary turned in his arms, looking up into the face of the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. "James, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not warned you about Marcus, if I had been too afraid to speak up?" James cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing the familiar path along her cheekbone. "I think we would have found each other eventually. Maybe not in the same way, maybe not as quickly, but what we have is too strong to have been avoided forever." Mary smiled, feeling the absolute certainty of his love, the security of knowing that she would never again have to face the world alone. "I love you, James Vance. Thank you for teaching me that I was worth fighting for." "Thank you for teaching me what was worth fighting for," James replied, leaning down to kiss her softly. "I love you too, Mary Vance." More than I ever thought possible. As they stood together on their balcony, holding each other under the stars, Mary reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she had been invisible, struggling, convinced that her life would never be more than survival. Tonight, she was launching a foundation that would help countless others, married to a man who loved her completely, raising a son who was proud of her courage. Marcus Thorne was serving a federal prison sentence for fraud, his assets seized and distributed among his victims. His threats and manipulations had not only failed, but had ultimately led to his complete downfall. Justice had been served, and Mary no longer lived in fear of what he might do next. "Mrs. Vance," David called from inside the apartment. "There is someone on the phone for you." Something about the Foundation's first official client. Mary looked at James, seeing the pride and love in his expression. Their real work was just beginning, helping victims, exposing predators, making sure that people like Marcus could not continue to destroy innocent lives. It would not be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. "Ready for the next adventure?" James asked, offering her his hand. Mary took his hand, feeling the strength and warmth of his fingers intertwined with hers. "Ready for anything, as long as we face it together." As they walked back into their home, their sanctuary, their command center, their launching pad for changing the world, Mary felt a peace and purpose she had never experienced before. She had found her voice, her strength, and her place in the world. More importantly, she had found a partner who would stand beside her through whatever challenges lay ahead. The girl who had been afraid to speak up had become a woman who made her voice heard. The victim had become an advocate. The janitor had become a foundation president, and the woman who had thought she was unworthy of love had discovered that she was worthy of everything life had to offer. Most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with passion, but with one person having the courage to speak the truth and another person having the wisdom to listen. Together, James and Mary Vance were proof that real love conquers all, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through the quiet daily choice to stand by each other, to fight for each other, and to build something beautiful together from the ruins of what came before. Their story had begun with betrayal and fear, but it would be remembered for courage and love. And that, Mary thought as she picked up the phone to help their foundation's first client, was exactly how she wanted it to be. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.